Master. The elemental spirits are roaming about in the air. Who is this master they speak of? Tahir looked in the direction of the elemental spirit that had answered him. To his surprise, the master of the elemental spirit that answered him was levitating in the air. Is that a dragon? It was a creature that looked like a dragon. However, Tahir was unsure whether it could be considered a dragon. The dragon's body was not made of flesh and blood. Instead, it was made of thousands of stars. It was as if the stars in the entire sky had gathered together to form the shape of a dragon. With the origin space's darkness as its background, every star on its body was dazzling. The dragon that was made of stars wore a 5-colored crown on its head. They were made of light spots of 5 different colors: red, blue, black, silver, and green. Above the crown, however, was yet another crown. The crown above the multicolored one was made out of soil. However, above the soil was an almighty watersprout, and surrounding said watersprout was a ring of flaming stars that ignited sparks of electricity from time to time. I see. Tahir knelt on the ground weakly. Tahir did not understand what the multicolored crown represented. However, Tahir understood the second crown's significance. It represented all of the elements of magic. Without a shadow of doubt, the crown of 5 elements was the symbol of the ruler of magic and elementals. Such a being had never been recorded in literature, as due to the lowly nature of human beings, they were not fit to learn of its existence. However, even if they were to come to learn of its existence, they would not live to tell the tale. What is magic to us humans? In the final moments of his life, Tahir began to look back on the meaning of magic, a power that had accompanied him for most of his life. According to the scholars of humanity, magic was a mysterious existence. It was a power that was born of specific rituals, movements, and incantations. In other words, everything that humanity had utilized thus far was done by the book. They had only memorized the knowledge that was passed down from their forebears. Very few of them had ever attempted to explore the true essence of magic. Tahir was proud of himself for gaining some insight on the essence of magic. After a long period of practicing magic, Tahir realized that magic was the materialization of the surrounding elementals. For example, by combining the fire elementals roaming in the air, he could create a ball of flames once their concentration had become high enough. He thought that he had touched the ceiling of the field of magic. He believed that there was no living creature, throughout the entire continent, who was more knowledgeable than him when it came to magic. That is, unless they were a god who was in charge of the elementals and magic. Although Tahir had postulated the existence of such a being, throughout all his journeys throughout the continent, he had never heard of such a god being mentioned. However, upon spotting the celestial dragon, all the dots in his mind had connected. It was not that the so-called god of elementals and magic did not exist. They had merely not ascended to godhood yet. Great. Tahir wanted to beg the celestial dragon for mercy, but the moment he opened his mouth, he realized that he was not even sure how to address them. Great god of elementals. Tahir spoke tentatively, but there was no response from the celestial being. Great god of magic. Tahir did not give up. If he could manage to figure out the being's title and address them respectfully, he might be able to talk his way out of the situation. Nevertheless, the celestial dragon remained silent time and time again. Meanwhile, the surrounding elemental spirits were starting to become restless. The elemental spirits materialized into specks of light and joined together to form a colorful river. While doing so, they were constantly giggling mischievously. He he he. He he he. Only one chance left. Only one chance. Seeing as the celestial dragon was still remaining silent, Tahir gulped audibly, and his lips trembled uncontrollably. With his now dry throat, he made one last attempt. Dragon. God? Following Tahir's last attempt, the elemental spirits dispersed and they opened up a path for him. At the end of this path, the celestial dragon extended its claws. My name is Max Agatha Hill Alexander. A booming voice that sounded like the resonance of thousands of planets poured into Tahir's mind along with a sharp pain. Tahir was stunned. He had heard this name once before. Isn't this the true name of the dragon hatchling from before? Could this celestial dragon be the true body of the dragon hatchling from before? A series of questions arose in Tahir's mind, but in the next second, he realized that he could no longer think. The celestial dragon had already pressed down its claws on Tahir's body. The celestial dragon did not even bother to use magic. Instead, it used the most primitive and violent method known to all creatures to crush Tahir into a stardust. Although there was no wind in the origin space, the wind elemental spirits present had cheekily blown away the dust that used to be Tahir. Don't. Upon seeing this scene, Max helplessly stretched out his claws. How am I supposed to eat this person after you've ground him into dust? Mia is still hungry. Without an ounce of hesitation, Max had immediately summoned his strongest form upon the start of the battle of existence. This was the first time he had seen with his own eyes just how powerful his future self was. As a transmigrator, Max had already made some mental preparations beforehand. He decided that no matter how powerful he was in the future, he would not become excited. However, upon the appearance of the celestial dragon, Max could not help but think aloud, holy sh*t. Too strong. Before the appearance of the celestial dragon, Max was living in a medieval world. However, upon the appearance of the celestial dragon, Max felt that he was now living in a fairy tale. Fortunately, the celestial dragon was Max's future form. Had the celestial dragon been his enemy, Max would feel that his transmigration was in vain. This is an extremely powerful creature. The celestial dragon isn't made out of flesh and blood. Each of the light spots on its body represented a planet. In other words, this celestial dragon isn't a carbon-based life form at all. It's a celestial life form. Although Max knew that as a transmigrator, he would become very powerful in the future. He had never expected himself to grow this unimaginably strong. With Tahir's death, the origin space began to dissipate. The celestial dragon also began to dissipate. Before it left, however, it exchanged a glance with Max. Strictly speaking, they were the same person. One was the present Max, and the other was the future Max.
Hey everyone, welcome to Firescale Audiobooks. If you enjoy the audiobooks, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. If you'd like to support us further, consider becoming a Patreon member. As a member, you'll gain the ability to request the next part of a novel audiobook I've uploaded, depending on your Patreon tier.
The galaxy that symbolized the celestial dragon's eyes were brilliant, yet profound. In the face of such a gaze, Max could felt non-existent goosebumps rising across his scaly skin. However, as they were the same person, Max could vaguely sense himself within the celestial dragon's gaze. Keep it up. The celestial dragon's booming voice echoed within the dissipating origin space. The future Max made sure to encourage his past self before taking his leave. The present Max replied, I will. Following this, the origin space had completely fallen apart, and time and space had resumed back to normal. Phew. Max had finally solved the problem that Mia had gotten them into. After killing 3 adventurers in a row, Max was exhausted. If there were a soft pillow before him, he would immediately start sleeping soundly. Nevertheless, there was still one matter to be done. Time to clean up the battlefield. Upon this thought, Max perked up once again. The 3 adventurers did not seem like regular adventurers. After all, each of their equipment was more valuable than the previous adventurer. Moreover, as it was Max that had killed them, it meant that all the spoils had belonged to him. If humans are allowed to slay dragon hatchlings and steal their body parts, then why can't I plunder their equipment? First of all, the equipment that Max was the most interested in was the warrior's ruby greatsword. The greatsword was a huge threat to Red Dragon. It was forged with the singular goal of slaying red dragons. If such a weapon were to fall into the hands of humans, Max's life would be thrown into living hell. Even though he had the cheat ability known as the Battle of Existence. At most, he could only protect himself and Mia. It would be difficult to ensure the survival of all the red dragons. If he and Mia were the only dragons left in the world, how would they ensure the continuation of the red dragon bloodline? It was truly a painful question to consider. However, even after spotting the greatsword, Max still sighed in disappointment. Max had used the dragon-vanquishing ballista to kill the human warrior. The human warrior was very skilled. He managed to block the arrow that was traveling at such high speeds. However, it was precisely because of his reaction speed that the greatsword had shattered. The 3 lines of runes that were made to deal with red dragons had also lost their original effect due to its shattering. They were now merely worthless lines of inscriptions. The only thing that was still intact was the ruby embedded in the hilt of the sword. What's so good about this thing? Max picked up the ruby from the hilt and weighed it in his hand. It was a ruby the size of a bowling ball. However, it was much heavier than he had imagined. A ruby of this mass and size was extremely rare. It could be considered a geological miracle. At the very least, Max had never seen such a huge ruby before throughout his past life. How should I deal with this? Max suddenly fell into a dilemma. Had he inherited the traits of red dragons, Max would not have such an issue. After all, any red dragon that spotted a ruby of this size would undoubtedly place it among the greatest of their treasures. Max did not understand why he did not inherit the treasure-hoarding trait of dragons, but he supposed that it was due to him being a transmigrator. The ruby that capable of making any red dragon go mad was just an ordinary stone in Max's eyes. Should I just keep it to myself and view it for my own pleasure? Max muttered out loud. But I don't even like it. Should I exchange it for money? Though I feel like it's not worth it. Dragons did indeed collect money. However, to dragons, the purchasing power of money was not important. All they cared about was the sparkle of the coins. Indeed, the dragons adored how shiny and beautiful the pile of gold coins were. It was for this simple reason that they collected coins. As for the daily expenses of dragons, forget it, the concept of expenses do not exist among dragons. If they were hungry, they would eat. If they wanted something, they would rob it. If they had no place to sleep in, they would randomly occupy a lair. If they were in a bad mood, they would roar at the sky. If they wanted to fulfill their fetishes, they would capture a princess and lock her up. All these processes did not cost a single cent. Dragons were such a simple race. They had no reason to spend money. They were truly a thrifty bunch. Max suddenly recalled a reason for the red dragon's love towards rubies. It seemed to be due to the magic contained within the rubies. The magic contained within the rubies was highly compatible with the red dragons who were skilled in magic. It was for this reason that they were attracted to rubies. It was also for this reason that swordsmen would embed rubies in their swords. By doing so, the offensive power of their swords would increase. However, using rubies to increase one's magic power was only done by humans. Due to their natural lack of mana, they required ways to increase their power. However, such an action was redundant for dragons. Then what on earth can I use this ruby for? Max scratched his head. Aside from using it as a gift to bribe other red dragons in the future, he had no other clue how to use it. Moreover, there was no way that he could bring it back to the lair. There was no way that it would go unnoticed by Agatha. At that point, Agatha would most likely forget about the concept of motherly love and snatch it away from her son. She would probably say something along the lines of, "How dare a small dragon hatchling like you keep such a huge ruby for yourself?" Agatha would snatch it away right before his very eyes. I should find a hole to bury it in. Max could not bear to part with the ruby. Although he had no use for it at the present moment, he also knew that he must not bring it back. As such, the only choice left to him was to bury it somewhere to be dug out when needed. Max located a spot and planted a blade of grass to mark it. Then, he dug open a hole. Red dragons were particularly good at digging. They dug holes faster than an excavator. Max had initially thought of it as a useless skill, and as such, he was pleasantly surprised to be using it. After digging a hole, Max carefully hid the ruby inside. Then, Max turned back to take a look. He spotted the dragon vanquishing ballista. "Oh yeah, I almost forgot about this thing." After saying those words, Max bent down again, and made the hole even deeper. After all, the dragon vanquishing ballista was also something that he needed to keep hidden from Agatha. As such, he dug a hole that was big enough to fit both the ballista and the ruby. With this thought in mind, Max continued to dig until he had created a hole that was the size of a room. "Phew, I've finally finished digging the hole." Only then did Max realize that his body was no longer the same as before. As a red dragon, digging a hole was something as simple as cleaning up a room. Max turned back to take a look at his work. The hole he was digging was already the size of his previous room. In that moment, Max decided that it would be his very own hideout. Max then turned his attention to the dragon vanquishing ballista. It was a 3-meter-tall giant ballista. As for its power, Max had witnessed it with his own eyes. Max estimated that when the bowstring was fully taut, it was capable of harming even a 3,000-year-old dragon like Agatha. However, such a great weapon must never be brought into the lair. Should he bring it back to the lair, and if Agatha were to spot it? It would be like a child returning home from school with an AK-47, and with a smile on their face. Moreover, dragons would never allow such items around themselves. Dragons were very disdainful of technology. The pride of the dragons had prevented them from fighting in any other way aside from using their own strength. As such, forget about armor or weapons. Some dragons refused to even work together with their own brethren. In short, fighting alone and barehanded was the very pinnacle of a dragon's combat ability. Max's only comment towards that attitude was that the times are changing. It's still fine for now, as the world is still in the medieval age. No matter how powerful humans were, they can only rely on heavy armor and some petty magic to barely stand on their own feet in the world. But in a few hundred years, when the humans have developed firearms and missiles, what would the dragons do then? While it's true that the dragons that have achieved godhood were unaffected by the developments in the mortal realm, for the dragons in the mortal realm, especially for dragon hatchlings like Max, the development of these weapons were highly threatening. Max was very familiar with the troublesome aspects of humans. Even if he were to annihilate all of them, there was no guarantee that they would not manage to reproduce again by some miracle. Tisk, why are humans like cockroaches? Max shook his head. Regardless, he was still very interested in the ballista. He did not mind that it was made by a human, nor that it was made by the bones of his own brethren. To Max, developing his own strength was the most important thing at the moment. To achieve this goal, improving himself via sleep alone was insufficient. So long as there was an avenue to increase his strength, he would gladly accept it. With this in mind, Max started to move the ballista. However, the ballista was much lighter than Max had imagined. Although it was 3 meters tall, in reality, it only weighed around 200 kilograms. For Max, who possessed the physical strength of a black dragon, he was able to easily move it. After taking 2 steps, Max suddenly thought of a problem. 200 kilograms. This might be a rather light item for me, but what of the previous owner, that female adventurer? That female adventurer didn't look very strong. Even if her physique is different from ordinary people, and she was born with supernatural strength that allows her to easily carry this ballista and run around, there's no way that she can outpace the other 2 adventurers, right? The human swordsman was as fast as a cheetah when he ran at full speed earlier. He should have been the first adventurer that we encountered at those speeds. How on earth did the female adventurer run so fast? The question lingered in Max's mind. Suddenly, he noticed that there were 4 iron wheels at the foot of the ballista. Wheels? Can this thing be pushed? No. Max noticed that the design of this ballista was very unique. Its shape reminded it of the folding bicycles he used to see in shopping malls. Can this ballista be folded? Max thought so and tried to fold it. Crack, crack, crack. Under Max's strength, the ballista really began to fold and transform. Finally, when Max folded the last part of the ballista, it had become a car. Max sat on top of the car. There was a white magic stone. The top part of the magic stone was dark, and the bottom part was still shining. Could this be? Although Max had never driven a car before, he had at least been in a car before. The magic stone was half bright and half dark. It was obviously used to show how much magic power was left. In a way, it was a fuel tank. Max thought to himself, can this car really be driven? The moment Max pressed down on the magic stone, the vehicle purred and mana began to surge. The car slowly started to move. Then, Max could feel the wind whizzing past his scales becoming stronger and stronger. Although he had already experienced the feeling of flying, Max was still surprised by the sensation that he was experiencing. It feels so much like driving a car. Was this something that could be thought of by humans in the Middle Ages? Although the world was slightly different from the Middle Ages that he was previously from, for example, there were dragons that could destroy the world at any moment, magic that would put the wizards from Harry Potter to shame, and adventurers of all ages. It was not to the extent that technology developed so quickly, was it? As such, if one were to claim that there existed other transmigrators on the continent, Max would believe them. Max drove to the entrance of the cave that he had dug, drove the car in, and put it together with the giant ruby. Then, he covered the cave with soil and sealed it. Finally, he put a small flower on top of it, so that he would not forget where he had buried the treasures in. However, such a situation was not likely to happen. After all, dragons had very sensitive noses. Unlike humans, where 90% of their information of the world was obtained from their eyes. For young dragons, 300% of their information came from the eyes, 200% came from the nose, and 150% came from the ears. That added up to 650%. There was nothing wrong with this figure. Shouldn't the senses of dragon hatchlings be several times that of a human? After hiding the equipment, Max focused on the only thing that could be eaten. The body of the human warrior. Although Max had killed 3 adventurers in a row, the female adventurer was charred, and the older one was crushed into powder by his future self. Only the warrior's corpse was intact, gaping hole in his chest aside. I should bring you back home for Mia. Neither Max nor Mia had eaten their fill when they were dining on the camels earlier. Furthermore, ever since Max found the adventurer's emblem, he dared not stay on the scene any longer. As such, not only had the hunt gone to waste, but both he and Mia did not eat too well. The desert night had come to an end. A ray of sunlight emerged from the horizon and gradually covered everything. Dawn had arrived, and it was time for the humans to become active. Max looked in the direction of the camel corpses and sighed. It's too dangerous to go back for them. There's no telling how many transmigrators there are in this world. I should head back for now. I've already obtained a huge ruby and a giant ballista. This is already a good enough harvest. Max walked to the warrior's corpse and took off all of his plate armor. The plate armor was of no value to the red dragon. It was merely a pile of scrap metal. Bringing it back would only be a waste of energy. By the time Max had returned to the lair, the sun in the sky was already somewhat scorching. A small figure was standing in front of the lair. Mia had been waiting there the whole time. Max had told Mia not to care about anything, and to just continue flying forward. Mia had done exactly as she was told. She flew all the way back to the cave without looking back. Then, she waited. From the dark night until the sun was high up in the sky, she was constantly waiting for Max's return. Mia had many things she wanted to say. For example, welcome back, you've worked hard, it's good that you're all right. However, being the proud creatures they were, no such words had existed in their vocabulary. After much deliberation and much stuttering, Mia finally burst out with the words, "Brother." Max smiled indifferently and teased, "Open up. The deliverman has arrived." Then, he threw the corpse of the swordsman to Mia. With that, the brother and sister consumed the swordsman's corpse at the mouth of the lair. Naturally, they did not dine within the lair itself. Doing so would catch Agatha's attention, after all. She would snatch away their food. It was already considered noble for a dragon to not eat their own children. As such, snatching away the food of their children was nothing too serious. Moreover, Agatha was still sleeping. It would not be a good idea to wake her up. After all, human meat was rather delicious. This was the first time Max had eaten a human. He knew that this day would come sooner or later. Humans and dragons were mortal enemies, and humans had always been a staple of a dragon's diet. He had imagined countless times about what kind of state of mind he would be in when the fated day would finally arrive. Or rather, he wondered for what reason would he eat humans. What kind of reason would cause him to have to eat his former species? Surprisingly, however, Max did not think much of it when the time had finally come. His hunger had allowed him to feast on the human corpse without any psychological barriers. Delicious. Mia licked her bloody mouth. It's even more delicious than those camels. Knock. Max rolled his eyes and hit Mia on the head. Isn't it because brother brought it for you? Mia lowered her head and stopped eating. After a while, Mia asked in a low voice, "What happened after I fled, brother?" "Nothing." Max ate the last piece of tender meat. He felt better now that he had something in his stomach. Regarding that battle, Max was unsure of how to explain it to Mia. No one would believe a dragon hatchling triumphing over 3 experienced adventurers, after all. Perhaps Mia would be willing to believe it at first, but as time passed and her knowledge grew, even Mia would find it strange. After all, the difference between a dragon hatchling and a top adventurer in terms of physique and battle experience was way too huge. Max had used too many underhanded moves to defeat the previous 2. As such, the matter must not be known to the other red dragons. Doing so would bring a great humiliation to the red dragons, after all. Since when do us dragons have to employ such underhanded techniques to deal with humans? However, Max would most likely only laugh at their derision. After all, the red dragons that thought this way were all adult dragons. In their eyes, humans were still as insignificant as ants. They had never considered how helpless a dragon hatchling that had yet to fully develop would fare against the vicious humans. Even now, Max still felt a lingering fear from the battles that had taken place the previous night. He had only managed to defeat the first 2 adventurers due to pure dumb luck and their underestimation of him. As for the old mage, had it not been for the battle of existence, Max would have already passed on, and his corpse would have been taken halfway to the human kingdom. Speaking of this, Max remembered that he knew how to use the battle of existence. Of course, he could not let others know about it. The gods were very cautious about the technique. Forget being capable of using it, most people were not even aware of its existence. He might be the only mortal that was capable of using the battle of existence in the world. If he were to brag about it and let others learn about the battle of existence, he would probably be punished by the gods. After all, it was one thing to get rich quietly, but it would be too much to bring others along. Therefore, Max had another reason not to disclose the truth to Mia. "It's really nothing." Max added, "However, we should be more careful in the future. If we face beings as strong as them again, don't provoke them. After all, we are still hatchlings." "Noted, brother," Mia replied. The brother and sister were indeed very hungry. They ate the human swordsman's corpse until there was only its skeleton left. Max beckoned for Mia to return to the lair first. Then, he found a place and buried the skeleton. This was Max's final act of mercy. To dragon hatchlings, adventurers were natural enemies. They were poachers who deserved to die. However, to the humans, dying in battle against the evil dragons was a great and heroic death. The reason why he was chased by the adventurers was because he had reincarnated into a red dragon. That was all. If he had reincarnated into a human instead of a red dragon, he probably would have hunted several dragon hatchlings once he grew up. Max sighed. He knew that he had no way out. Since he was a dragon in this life, he should just be a dragon. After burying the swordsman, Max began to pray in front of the grave. Your muscles are well trained. You tasted quite good. May you rest in peace. Amen. Mia felt drowsy after her meal. In this moment, she was curled up on a rock and was already snoring faintly. However, Mia only took up a quarter of the rock's space and slept in the corner. She left a large portion of the space unused for Max's own use. While sitting atop of the rock, Max began to observe his mother, Agatha. Agatha had been sleeping since yesterday, and she was still holding a pile of treasures in her arms. As for the huge commotion that had transpired in the desert, Agatha did not rush over to support her children, and instead, she had left them to fend for themselves. However, Max did not blame her. After all, it was not like he could expect her to raise her children by the standards of a human. As a dragon, Agatha was already a very responsible mother. Many dragons like to taste their children for fun when they had nothing else to do. Sigh, why even bother mulling over such a useless point? I should sleep and find something to eat tomorrow. Regardless, this is my new life now. Max circled the rock twice, curled up around her sister, and fell into a deep sleep. Perhaps when I wake up tomorrow, I'll become stronger again, or perhaps I'll finally receive the rewards from the battle of existence. A guard yawned. The job of standing guard was really boring. However, upon recalling that he was guarding the current king of the Pandey kingdom, the guard immediately became spirited again. The fact that he was assigned to watch over the most influential figure in the kingdom had meant that the king had placed great trust in him. As long as I'm here, no one shall be allowed to pass through this door. Just as the guard had finished making the oath in his heart, he heard a young female voice resounding throughout the corridor. Daddy, play ball with me. It's the little princess. The little princess is here again. He saw the little princess carrying a silk-embroidered ball and running overexcitedly. The maid behind her could not hold her back at all. Bang! The little princess pushed open the iron door. The guard did not dare to stop the little princess. He hurriedly sheathed his halberd behind his back, as he worried that he would injure the little princess by accident. Then, he stretched out his arm as a show of respect. After all, the little princess was the child that the old king had doted on the most. If any of the other royalty were to push open the door while the king was working, they would be immediately locked up. Who would have thought? The old king had emphasized it many times during his first public speech. All nobles should restrain their actions. Should they break the law, they would be as guilty as the commoners. Even the princes and princesses could not enjoy such privileges within the palace. They could not allow their personal feelings to interfere with the king's work. However, before the painting of said speech had even dried, the little princess was born. From then on, there would be no more peace in the palace, as the little princess alone had turned the entire palace upside down. She was greatly pampered by the king. The king turned around with an angry grimace. His eyes were terrifyingly sharp, like a lion in a duel. However, the moment he noticed that it was the little princess, his eyes immediately became as docile as a house kitten. Hee, my little darling Tess, why are you here? The king lifted Tess up and spun her around twice. It was only after Tess giggling loudly that the king put her back down. Let's play ball. Daddy, please play ball with me. Okay, let's go. Daddy will play with you. The king put down his work and played with Tess until the sun went down. Tess was so tired that she fell asleep in the arms of the maid, and the game ended. Sigh. All of this was seen by the guard who was watching over the king. Once the maid had carried Tess away, the old king finally showed the fatigue that he should have at his age. He let out a long sigh, and the sadness that could not be hidden was written all over his face. Tahir is dead. The whereabouts of Carvella and Rafik who were accompanying him are also unknown. How can 3 diamond rank heroes disappear just like that? The old king muttered to himself. He lowered his head, crawled into the iron door, and lit the candle to continue working. The guard did not dare to respond to the old king's muttering. After all, the best sentry was one that acted like an emotionless puppet, one that was fully alert of their surroundings. News of Tahir's death had already reached the palace in the morning. Even a lowly guard like him had learned of Tahir's death from the conversations of the nobles around him. The same had applied to the 2 diamond rank adventurers who had accompanied Tahir, Carvella and Rafik. The whereabouts of those 2 people were also unknown, and they had never sent a letter to the courier station. This small party of 3 diamond rank heroes was the strongest ever party that had ever been formed within the kingdom. To deal with the 3 of them, one would need at least 1,000 soldiers, and even then, there was no guarantee of success. As a guard, he was fortunate enough to meet Tahir a few times. In his impression, Tahir had always been a slightly crazed old man, but his magic was superb. During some festivals, in order to add to the fun, Tahir would turn all the guards into sheep, and he would turn all the sheep into human. With such terrifying strength, many people felt that it was too dangerous to retain Tahir as the court mage. However, later on, everyone soon understood that it was more terrifying to have Tahir as the enemy than as their ally. As for Rafik, the guard recalled that he and Rafik were rather close with one another. Rafik was over 2 meters tall, and could easily lift a statue with one arm. He could also hold his liquor well. In the army, he was like a star. In order to reward Rafik for his bravery, the kingdom even bestowed the Red Dragon Slayer to Rafik. The guard still had a deep impression of that great sword. After all, anyone who saw the large ruby that was embedded within it would instantly be mesmerized. From that day onwards, the guard gradually began to understand why red dragons adored rubies that much. They were truly a beautiful gemstone. There was also that legendary ranger, Carvella. Speaking of which, the guard remembered that he was once the subordinate of Carvella's subordinates. He was once lucky enough to lay eyes on Carvella's beautiful visage. Moreover, on the battlefield, Carvella was capable of weaving a rain of arrows by herself. Her rain of arrows was capable of killing 100 enemy infantrymen in a single strike. As such, the title of Slayer of 100 Men, and the dragon-vanquishing ballista had been bestowed upon Carvella. As such, the guard could not help but wonder just how powerful was their enemy, if they were capable of putting such powerful figures into such a disadvantageous situation. Perhaps the enemy's main force have already reached the northern borders of the Pandey kingdom. Since sentry duty was rather boring, the guard soon began to let his imaginations run wild. The 3 heroes, Tahir, Carvella, and Rafik, were the top fighting forces within the Pandey kingdom. Killing them was no easy task. The only possible explanation that the guard had come out with was that a large number of enemy troops had already invaded the north, and they had coincidentally encountered the 3 heroes. The problem with this explanation, however, was, how did an army that was huge enough to defeat the 3 heroes manage to sneak into the north without raising any alarms? Could it be? Maybe they weren't defeated by humans. The guard immediately connected the dots. Perhaps it wasn't humans who killed the 3 heroes, but rather powerful beings of other races. Perhaps they were done in by the overlords of the sky, the dragons. Upon this thought, the guard shivered. He had seen a real dragon once before, and from what he remembered, it was disaster incarnate. When a dragon spread its wings, it could cover the sky, and when it roared, it could scare the most cowardly of soldiers to death. Whatever the dragon's breath touched, the item would instantly be charred into charcoal. The southern lord's wishes to exterminate the dragons. Ho ho. Alfred threw the letter aside and began to read the next one. With news of Tahir's death circulated throughout the kingdom, everyone, from the nobles to the beggars on the street, were mourning for the death of the legendary figure. At the same time, they were also gossiping about it with much fervor. They were wondering who exactly was responsible for Tahir's death. The location where Tahir was last seen was in the desert towards the north. Early that year, they had received reports of dragons being sighted there. As such, the general consensus of the public was that Tahir had died to the hands of said dragons. After all, at Tahir's level of strength, there was almost no one in the world who was capable of defeating him. The only possible explanation was that he was done in by the dragons. Naturally, the southern lords wanted nothing more than to launch a crusade against the dragons. They intended for the northern nations to expend all their resources in the crusade against the dragons, while they themselves would sit back and take advantage of the situation. Let's see what the northern lords think. Alfred moved over to another stack of documents and found what he was looking for. It was a letter sent by Duke Ardarian, one of the northern lords, a few days ago. He cut it open and began to read through it. It started off with a simple paragraph. It must be that ancient red dragon, Agatha. No other creature is capable of harming Tahir. As for the remaining portion of the letter, Alfred did not bother to read through it. After all, it was merely a regular report regarding the tax collection and the construction occurring within his territory. Dragons, huh? Alfred sighed. The faint flame of the candle flickered in his breath. Dragons were undoubtedly the greatest enemy of the Pandey kingdom. Back in the past, humans had only regarded other human beings as their greatest enemies. After 100 years of war, the Pandey kingdom was formed, and they were united under one flag. However, as time went on, the humans realized that in the face of the mighty dragons, everything that they had built up was as fragile as a piece of paper. There were some dragons that were almost at the demigod level living in the sky. They were only sleeping. Once they woke up, they would definitely bring about a cataclysmic disaster to the human civilization. Fortunately, most of the dragons at that level cared not for the lowly mortals that were living under them. However, a few of those dragons had also been hunted and pursued by humans back when they were younger. As such, upon obtaining power, they would take their revenge against humanity. Dragons of that level would usually slumber for hundreds of years. As such, by the time that they had awoken from their slumber, countless generations of humans would have already come and gone. Although it was no longer a debt that could be settled, the proud dragons would not just sit back and forget about their grudge. Perhaps one day, they would appear in the skies of the Pandey kingdom and unleash terror upon the humans as a way to settle their grudge. It was not surprising for such a thing to happen. As the current king of the Pandey kingdom, Alfred had to maintain a fearless appearance in the crowd. However, whenever he was alone, he could not help but tremble whenever he imagined such a scene taking place before him. According to the legends, the Pandey kingdom was not the first ever civilization of mankind. Within the long river of history, there existed countless human civilizations no less as prosperous as Alfred's own kingdom. However, they were all annihilated by the dragons who were close to the realm of the gods. Of course, these were merely legends. No one could prove that such civilizations had truly existed. They could have been stories made up by bards to amuse the masses, or they could have been actual events that had taken place. An ancient dragon, if our foe is only an ancient dragon, we might still have a shot in dealing with it. Alfred noticed that not only did the letter mention that the dragon was a red dragon, it had also stated that it was an ancient dragon. An ancient dragon was undoubtedly a disaster for small nations. However, the Pandey kingdom was a colossal empire, and if Alfred could obtain the cooperation of the lords, he stood a good chance in winning. At the end of the letter, the northern lord Ardarian had also mentioned something. He had already gathered his troops, which was 3,000 men strong. He was prepared to scout the northern region to gather more intel on Agatha. The moment Max woke up, he first took out his wings from under Mia's head. He did not know when Mia had slept on high swings. After all, she was no longer in the same position that she had gone to sleep in. The lair is empty. Agatha's nowhere to be found. She must have gone out to hunt. Hoo-ha. Max took a deep breath and exhaled heavily. He could clearly feel that his body had changed. Dragons use sleep as a means of growth. They could become stronger through sleep without any training. Therefore, every time Max woke up from sleep, he would feel refreshed and energized. Usually, he could also feel that the muscles in his body had expanded somewhat. This morning, however, Max felt different. This time, he felt like he had become purer. He could not describe this feeling. It was as if he had become much more attuned with the surrounding environment. Perhaps, winning the battle of existence has provided me with some mastery over the elements. Max thought aloud. Unless something had gone wrong, he should have received his reward for winning the battle of existence. He had killed a human mage named Tahir. From that, he had obtained some talent in magic and the affinity to the elements. Perhaps it was due to this affinity to elements that Max felt more attuned to nature. After all, in the world that he had transmigrated to, everything in the world was made up of 5 elements. They were wind, fire, water, thunder, and earth. At the same time, they also corresponded to the 5 basic types of magic. The 5 elements corresponded to 5 different types of magic. No creature, be they humans or dragons, was incapable of breaking this rule. Of course, the silver dragons who were capable of using space-time magic were an exception. Unlike other life forms, however, dragons did not need to train hard to sense the existence of the elementals to use magic. Dragons were born with innate knowledge of magic. For example, the red dragons were born with a high affinity for the thunder element. Most red dragons were capable of using thunder-type magic since birth. Of course, there were still exceptions. Dragons like Max, who were incapable of casting magic at birth, were a small minority among the dragons. This was a problem that troubled Max as well. After all, a red dragon that was incapable of casting thunder magic would be looked down upon by other red dragons. However, Max need not worry about the issue any longer. System, show me see my attributes. Okay, loading. True name, Max Agatha Hill Alexander. Race, red dragon, neutral evil. Current dragon rank, hatchling. Age, 1. Maximum lifespan, 12,000, ancient dragon. Attack, 25, normal red dragon hatchling 15. Spell strength, 500, normal red dragon hatchling 25. Defense, 20, normal red dragon hatchling 10. Speed, 30, normal red dragon hatchling 13. Magic, lightning arrow rain, thunderstorm, thunder paralysis, thunderclap, light affinity, thunder immunity, thunderous divine retribution, 10 million volts of thunder. Abilities, bite, claw strike, stomp, tail swipe. Breath, lightning, strong acid. Remarks, you've learned these many spells just by sleeping. Can you please keep a low profile? Max looked at the stats interface that was occupying his field of vision. The magic panel had occupied the largest area within the interface. There were way too many spells, and it had taken 1 good minute to read through it. However, even after reading through the entire list, Max gave it yet another read. My God, I have almost all the thunder spells. Max could not believe that he had obtained all the thunder spells just from killing Tahir. At this point, it was no exaggeration to call Max the Thunder Mage King. Increase in combat prowess aside, there was also another benefit to obtaining those spells. With these spells, my identity as a transmigrator would no longer be obvious. It was said that the Red Dragons, a race famous for their use of thunder magic, had also possessed a physique that made them resistant to thunder magic. As a result, the common way for them to greet each other was to fire bolts of electricity at one another. Had I not learned thunder magic, I would be incapable of facing other red dragons in the future. I might not even be able to find a partner had I continued being incapable of casting magic. Max did not want to be a single dragon. He had been single for 18 years in his previous life. Without a partner, how would he be able to live through his long years as a dragon? Although Max was overjoyed, he made sure to check Mia's stats as well. System, check my sister's stats. Loading. True name, Mia Agatha Affendor. Race, red dragon, neutral evil. Current dragon rank, dragon hatchling. Age, 1. Maximum lifespan, 10,000, ancient dragon. Attack, 5, normal red dragon hatchling 15. Spell strength, 250 normal red dragon hatchling 25. Defense, 7 normal red dragon hatchling 10. Speed, 12, normal red dragon hatchling 13. Magic, lightning arrow. Ability, bite. Breath, lightning. Remarks, did she get an extra 0 in the spell strength column? Max nodded and looked away. Not bad. As expected of my beloved sister. Her magic strength is half of mine. And these are just the results from Mia's sleep. Her high aptitude for magic that was mentioned by the system was indeed correct. Max climbed out of the lair and enjoyed the scenery outside. The vast sky was like a pure blue board. There was not a single cloud to be seen. There was no sign of Agatha either. She hasn't abandoned us, right? Usually, dragons would raise their young until they had become teen dragons before leaving them. As for whether they would have the chance to meet again in the future, it was all up to fate. However, even if they were to meet, they would not reminisce about the past together. At most, they would only treat each other as another unfamiliar red dragon. This was the ethics of dragons. The mothers who were on the kinder spectrum of dragons would raise their young until they were adult dragons before leaving them. Conversely, there were also the irritable ones that would eat their own dragon eggs as snacks. Max had originally thought that his mother, Agatha, would raise them based on the common practices of dragons. However, it seemed that Agatha was unwilling to do so. Sigh. Max heaved a long sigh. Sure enough, there's a trade-off. I've become a powerful red dragon, but now I'm left without a mother. But no matter. I'm not a dragon hatchling that's only a few months old. I'm a dragon hatchling with 18 years of experience as a human. Plus, even if Agatha had really left without saying goodbye to us, I still have my dear sister to accompany me. With my 500 points of spell strength, as well as the hidden ballista and the giant ruby, I have more than enough strength to continue living on in this world. Worse comes to worse, I can always rely on the battle of existence to defeat my enemies, and at the same time, I can also plunder a portion of their abilities. But there's still a risk of doing so. After all, I can only use it when I'm in a life or death situation. If I'm even a second late in using it, I'll die. While Max was trying to plan out his future without Agatha, a pale red shadow streaked across the sky. Agatha had returned. With a mouth full of camels at that. Pa. Agatha spat out the camels. Max. What are you doing at the entrance? Max cleverly replied, waiting for Mother to come home, of course. Agatha rolled her eyes in disbelief at such an answer, but she still picked the largest camel and threw it to Max. However, Max did not eat the food in front of him. Instead, he said, I'll wake Mia up. We'll eat together. As he said that, Max flew down and gently patted Mia's head, just like he usually did. Mia slowly opened her eyelids. However, upon smelling the metallic stench in the air, she immediately jumped up. The 3 dragons had formed a ring around the pile of camel meat. Max and Mia's stomachs cried out at the same time. They were famished. It was to be expected, though, as they had not eaten much last night. In order to avoid battle with the adventurers, they had to flee before they had completed their meal. Following that, they consumed a human warrior as supper and barely held back their hunger. As such, the siblings were drooling at the sight of the camels. Before we eat, I'll give you another chance. Agatha picked out a camel and placed it in front of Mia. Mia. Use your dragon breath to roast the camel. After saying those words, however, Agatha hurriedly pushed the other camels away, as if she had recalled something. She was afraid that Mia would accidentally burn all the camels. Let me try, Mother. Mia opened her mouth and tried to spit out her dragon breath, as if she was retching. However, due to her hunger, Mia no longer had the power she possessed from the other day. The dragon breath she spat out was small and intermittent. When she was at her full strength, Mia was incapable of controlling her strength at all. She would turn the camels into charcoal in an instant. However, now that Mia had run out of strength, it was just right. Not long after, a fragrance that made Max's heart skip a beat wafted towards him. Had it not been for Agatha stopping him, he would have already pounced on the camel and eaten it. "Stop," Agatha said slowly. Mia stopped and started coughing violently. It seemed that using dragon breath in such a state was a little tiring for her. "As for you, who can't even use dragon breath, don't think that you're qualified to be a red dragon just because you're strong." With that, Agatha picked out the second camel and threw it in front of Max. Max nodded and accepted the challenge. At the same time, he thought to himself, "This seems to be Mother's way of teaching us how to cook. She must be worried that we'll starve to death once she leaves us." Max approved of this particular behavior from his mother. Be they a dragon or a human, the first instinct of a mother was to teach their children how to feed themselves. The first time Max had taken the test, he was incapable of unleashing his dragon breath. The most he managed was weak electric sparks. Perhaps it was the price that he had paid for reincarnating into a pure dragon. As a result, Max did not inherit the traits that were expected of red dragons. Such a child was an anomaly among red dragons. As such, Max was considered to be rather lucky to not be expelled immediately. However, Max had no such worries that day. After all, his control over his lightning dragon breath was also correlated to his mastery over the thunder element. At this point, Max had already learned all of the thunder element spells known to man. Aside from some spells that required a huge amount of mana to cast, Max could use any other spell that he so desired. Max envisioned a stream of electricity flowing from his core and shooting out of his mouth. Following this, a current of electricity was fired from his mouth. Although it had numbed his tongue somewhat, for some reason, it was a pleasurable feeling for Max. Sizzle sizzle. Although the camel before him was already dead, its nerves were still intact. As such, the electric current that Max unleashed had caused it to convulse. Max realized that he had not only obtained the ability to use all the thunder spells, but he had also become proficient in using it. He was not like Mia, who possessed great power but lacked the ability to control it. He was able to unleash an electric current that was of suitable size, and that was stable from the beginning to the end. Therefore, not long after, a lethally addictive roasted camel fragrance was released into the air. Not bad. Agatha's eyes were initially wide open at Max's display. However, she soon regained her indifferent expression and claimed that his performance was not bad. "All right, remember this feeling from today. In the future, you'll have to use a similar amount of power to roast camel meat. Remember, us red dragons prefer our food cooked." Agatha turned her head around. Following this, she unleashed her own blast of dragon breath to roast the remaining camel meat. The three dragons then ate their breakfast together. The life of the dragons was monotonous and uneventful. After taking their meal, the three dragons then returned to their designated spots and went to sleep. However, unlike usual, Agatha suddenly turned around and spoke these words, "Hurry up and sleep, the both of you. Grow up quickly, so that I can return to my free and unfettered life like I used to." Max was unsurprised, as he had long known that this day would come. Agatha was only around 3,000 years old. In human years, she was only around 17 or 18 years old. There was still a whole life ahead of Agatha. This was the nature of dragons. Agatha had grown tired of raising children. She was most likely hoping to hook up with some handsome dragon. However, halfway through his sleep, he felt droplets of water dripping onto his wings. Upon looking back, he noticed that Mia, who was sleeping on his wings, was crying with her eyes wide open. Max roared in his heart, "You're a dragon. A dragon. How can you cry like a big baby?" However, Max had left his comments in his thoughts. He asked her gently, "What's wrong, Mia? Mom doesn't want us anymore." Yes. Mia raised her head. Her pupils were trembling as tears welled up in her eyes. Did we do something wrong? No. Then why does she want to leave us? We are dragons. Max's tone was calm. It was not the tone that one should be using to coax a child. However, Mia's tears never stopped. She choked and said, "Sometimes I feel that the sky is so big, it's like an endless blue abyss. Once we fly apart, we might never find the other party again." Max felt that he had taken the wrong approach. At this rate, her eyes might swell up from all her crying. Max spread his wings and wrapped Mia inside. He was so much bigger than Mia that Mia could not be seen from the outside. Then, Max patted his bulging belly and made muffled sounds, as if he was playing a musical instrument. "The sky is not as big as you think. One day, I will show you an ever bigger sky. One that is pitch black, and one that's filled with an infinite amount of stars." "Really?" Mia's muffled voice rang out from Max's wings. "Yes, the outer sky is indeed pitch black." Max did not know how to explain it. After all, beyond the blue skies was the pitch-black universe. "I'm not talking about that," Mia replied. "I mean, you will always be with me, at least until the day we visit the outer sky, right?" "Yes," Max replied. He did not expect Mia's question to be focused on the being together part, and he had assumed it to be regarding the outer sky. Under Max's affirmative answer, Mia gradually calmed down. Max released his wings to reveal a sleeping Mia, with a few drops of tears hanging from the corner of her eyes. Is she really a dragon? Max had initially thought of himself as an anomaly among the dragons. Compared to his cruel brethren, he was as merciful as a saint. As such, he had never expected his sister to be even more sensitive than him. Perhaps her genes are mutated. At this point, Max could only use genetic mutations to explain this phenomenon. It was not impossible for one or two unusual dragons to appear, after all. In any case, as long as it was a living creature, no matter how powerful it was possible for such mutations to occur. At times, these mutations would prove beneficial, as they would bestow their hosts with greater talent. Most of the time, however, they were more of a bane than a boon, as the mutated host might not even live to make a difference. Based on Mia's actions, Max surmised that she had only acted this way due to a genetic mutation. After all, normal dragons would not cry easily. The only time that they would feel sad and tearful was when they had lost their hoard of treasure. Even then, they would more likely feel hopeless and angry rather than sad. As for the separation between family members, forget about it. To them, leaving their family members was as natural as drinking water. One morning, Agatha's voice rang out, "Get up, you lazy bums. I'm going to show you something today." Max shook his head. The moment he woke up, his mother had already begun to inform him of his schedule for the day. "She wants to show us something. Is there even anything good in this desert?" Max did not understand, but he still flew behind Agatha. After a while, Mia exclaimed, "Humans." Max looked down. There were indeed humans. Moreover, there was more than one. It was a human village. Agatha stopped in midair. "These creatures are called humans. They are something you must be careful of in the future. Although they are not strong, their intelligence is comparable to us dragons. However, unlike us, they are even more cunning, and they're willing to sink low to achieve their goals. Stay quiet after this. Just follow behind me. I'll show you how we should interact with humans as dragons." With that, Agatha swooped down. "It's a dragon." The village chief heard a burst of sound from the sky, and to his terror, the skies had been occupied by a huge red dragon. Boom! The huge dragon suddenly landed in the center of the village, and raised a cloud of dust in the process. A dragon. It's Agatha. Agatha is here again. Our tribute have been on time, right? Why is Agatha here then? Damn it, let's run. No, we can't run, we'll be killed if we run. All the villagers knelt on the ground and worshipped Agatha. All of them were trembling, but not a single one of them had dared to run. The last village chief who suggested to run had been torn in half by Agatha in front of everyone. Dragons were such unreasonable creatures. Agatha treated all the villagers as slaves. She neither killed them easily nor let them go. In order to continue living, the village would have to send a constant tribute of camels to Agatha. After all, camels were the favorite food of red dragons. For this reason, the villagers had tightened their belt, and had even sold some of their children away. They were forced to do so as it would enable their tributes to arrive on time, and by doing so, they hoped to prevent Agatha from slaughtering them. However, Agatha had still paid their village a visit. They were deathly afraid that she was here to slaughter some of them to appease whatever bad mood she was in. The dust dispersed and Agatha's form was in full view to the villagers. Compared to the mud houses in the village, Agatha was so huge that even when she was lying on the ground, she looked as massive as a tiny mountain. Agatha's roared, and the powerful shockwaves had caused several villagers to faint from fear. The village chief swallowed his saliva and stuttered, Lady Agatha. Is this humble one permitted the honor of viewing your majestic visage? Permission granted. A cold voice sounded. The village chief raised his head. The eyes of the dragon, which were like huge lava balls, were bearing down at him at this moment. He could even feel the wind that was stirred up whenever Dragon breathed, and he could see all the gaps in her scales with vivid clarity. Lady Agatha. He resisted the urge to turn around and run. He asked on behalf of all the villagers, May I know to what do we owe this pleasure of your visit today? A camel or a baby? The village chief extended his trembling hands. But we don't have any more camels, nor do we have any babies. I'm really telling the truth. Bang! Agatha ignored the village chief, and swept off the ceiling of a house with her tail. Then, Agatha reached in with her claws and took out a small object. Upon closer look, Max noticed that it was a crying baby. No. That's our last descendant. Lady Agatha. Please let us off this time. It has been a long time since a child was born in the village. Most of them have been sold for camels. Lady Agatha, eat me. I'm willing to die for that child. Max felt that something was off. Just as the villagers had mentioned, in order to pay tribute to his mother, the villagers had sold off their children in exchange for camels. In other words, in the eyes of the villagers, their own lives were greater than that of their children. In that case, why do they care so much about this baby girl, then? Why would they be willing to sacrifice themselves in exchange for this baby's survival? This is very unusual. Max thought so and secretly summoned his system. System, take a look at that baby. Okay, the information is being generated. Name, Emily. Race, human. Current level, none. Age, half a month. Maximum lifespan, 136. Attack, 0, normal human 12. Spell strength, 34, normal human 3. Defense, 1, normal human 5. Speed, 0, normal human 8. Magic, frost arrow, lightning paralysis, fireball, earthen wall, water ripple. Remarks, this woman is of Tahir's bloodline. Her mother is a commoner from Deerheart village. By using a forbidden spell, she was able to give birth to the child within half a month. This child has inherited Tahir's natural affinity for magic. So that's why. Upon reading the baby's information, Max finally understood. This girl is Tahir's child. Although I'm not sure how the villagers managed to persuade Tahir into impregnating one of the women here. Max was familiar with Tahir's power as a mage. It was only natural for a mage of his caliber to give birth to a child with impressive magical aptitude. It was for this reason that the villagers had treated the baby like a treasure. Most likely, the baby was their last hope to defeat Agatha. While it was a good idea, unfortunately for them, Agatha had thrown a wrench into their plans. Hee hee. Agatha suddenly laughed and brought the baby to Max. You're both children. I'll let you decide the fate of this child, then. For some reason, Agatha had handed the baby to him, and she had allowed him to choose what to do with it. Max took the baby from his mother's hands. The baby's light weight and her small, chubby hands that were incapable of holding anything had reminded Max of his brothers and sisters from his previous life. In his previous life, Max had 3 younger brothers and 1 younger sister. As the head of the family, Max had the responsibility of taking care of his siblings. As he watched them grow up, a sense of pride rose within Max's heart, and it felt as if he had accomplished something great. Max wanted to spare the baby's life. Firstly, he could not bring himself to do it. Before the baby, his cold, merciless dragon heart had melted like butter. Secondly, the baby girl had great aptitude in magic. If he could take her in for his own use in the future, it would be the most ideal scenario. Perhaps due to the hard dragon scales on his body, the baby started to cry noisily and let out ear-piercing sounds. No. Please, Lord Dragon Hatchling. Please let Emily go. Immediately, the villagers hurriedly groveled their way over and begged Max to let the baby go. Max glanced at the villagers, then he looked back at his mother. He found that his mother's pupils had become vertical, and she was watching him with great interest. Phew. Max heaved a long sigh of relief. He understood his mother's intentions. This is the wisdom of a dragon, a mother dragon. Agatha wouldn't have come here without reason. She has a goal that she wishes to achieve. Agatha would leave us sometime in the future, and she had only just recently hinted at this. Perhaps Agatha is worried that once she leaves us, the villagers would bully us 2 weak dragon hatchlings. So this is her plan. Agatha's goal was to establish a foothold for the 2 dragon hatchlings' prestige in the village, and to make the villagers fear them. However, in order to make the plan successful, she needed sacrifices. The more fear that she could inflict on the villagers, the more successful Agatha's plan would be. If successfully conducted, whenever the villagers thought of the dragon hatchlings, they would think back at this point in time. They would recall how much Agatha adored the dragon hatchlings. They would recall that she loved them so much that she had even left the matters of life and death of the villagers to her beloved children. Whenever they thought of the dragon hatchlings, they would think of their mother, Agatha. They would not dare to lay a hand on the dragon hatchlings. Max nodded. If his speculation was correct, then there was no need to sacrifice the baby. As such, Max tossed the baby forward. The quicker ones among the villagers immediately used their own bodies to cushion the fall of the baby. Then, under everyone's astonished gazes, Max slowly stated, I don't like eating babies. I'm sick of them. Didn't one of you mention that you were willing to die for her? Come out. Following Max's words, an old man got up from the ground and staggered towards Max. Lord Dragon Hatchling, I'm willing to die for her. Please accept me. Max chuckled. That's right. I like my meat lean. With that, Max opened his mouth. Crunch. Max chomped down on the old man. At the same time, he deliberately bared his sharp fangs in front of everyone. While everyone was gasping in terror or crying in grievance, Max ate the old man in the cruelest and most inhumane way possible. At the same time, he left the remaining half for his sister, Mia. However, Mia said that the meat was not very fresh, and was not particularly delicious. The villagers either covered their eyes, or they watched the whole process with lifeless eyes. Even until the dragon's departure, the villagers did not say a single word aside from the dull, thank you for sparing the baby. Under Agatha's lead, the 3 dragons continued to fly. Not long after, Agatha suddenly stopped and hovered in the air. Max, do you really not like babies? Or are you secretly harboring compassion towards humans? Sure enough, Mother still doubts me. Fortunately, I've already thought of an excuse beforehand. The main reason Max had let Emily off was due to her high aptitude for magic. He felt that it would be a pity for the baby to die just like that. Max soon realized that they were not heading back to their lair. Obviously, his mother was trying to do the same thing again. However, Max doubted that he would find any of Tahir's children there. They were most likely only ordinary humans. Although Max still found the act rather distasteful, if sacrificing some humans were enough to avoid his mother's suspicion, Max was willing to do it. After all, being labeled an outcast was a very dangerous thing to occur to dragons. Not only his mother, but every other red dragon in the world would not welcome them. Red dragons were considered the more docile species among the dragons. As for the other chromatic dragons, being an outcast would mean that they would not give up until Max died. If they wanted to gain a foothold among the dragons, there were only two methods available. Firstly, they would have to savor the blood of all living creatures. They needed to have the mentality that they were the rulers of the world, and that all other creatures were merely ants. With this mentality, they would be able to gain the recognition of the other dragons. Secondly, they needed to be powerful. They needed to possess enough power to bend the rules to their will. If they were seen as an outcast, then all they needed to do was to eliminate his enemies until he was no longer an outcast. By then, they would be the majority. However, before obtaining such power, Max still needed the approval of his mother. Max looked straight into his mother's eyes and answered truthfully. "Mother, I have no mercy towards humans. I can prove it to you in the next place." Mother nodded. "Remember what you said." "My lord, we've managed to gather 1,232 cavalrymen." "Excellent." Ardarian stretched out his hand. "Bring me my sword." Schwing. Ardarian pulled out his sword. The hum of steel was long but delicate. He closed his eyes as if he was appreciating a musical instrument. Even though the days of war were long gone, every time he heard the sound of a sword being unsheathed, the hair on his back would stand up. At first glance, the longsword looked like a work of art. It was forged out of bright-colored steel, and it had a golden hilt. Back in the years of war, he had relied on this longsword to slaughter and bathe in the blood his countless enemies. However, now that they were at peace, his longsword had instead become a symbol of his authority. It was an insignia of his position as the ruler of Longsong Alley. His territory, Longsong Alley, was the northernmost city of the kingdom. It was an industrious region, and its main economic activity was the mining of copper ores. Upon processing, they would export their copper in exchange for wheat and cloth from the south. Life was considered to be pretty good there. If one were to continue heading north from Longsong Alley, they would encounter several small villages, followed by a vast desert that contained enough sand to bury the kingdom several times over. Should they survive their arduous trek across the perilous desert, they would then come face to face with a seemingly endless plain of snow. Since there were no enemy regions in the north, no troops were stationed in Longsong Alley. That was until a dragon descended upon them one day. In less than a year of its initial arrival to the desert region, it had managed to hunt down all the creatures living there. Once the creatures of the desert had been hunted to extinction, it then attacked the camels within the villages. Once the villages had run out of camels, it began to hunt the villagers. The appetite of the dragon constantly grew. Sooner or later, the villages would be annihilated by the dragon, and once that happened, the dragon would undoubtedly set its sights on Longsong Alley. In order to prepare for the upcoming threat, Ardarian rapidly developed the military industry. Within the span of a few years, he had managed to churn out his first batch of troops. At the price of sacrificing the villages, Ardarian had managed to muster a force to resist the dragon. Currently, there were over 2,000 foot soldiers garrisoned in Longsong Alley. They were considered to be the first line of defense, as well as cannon fodder. Should the dragon lay siege to the city, the foot soldiers would thrust their pikes in an attempt to pierce the dragon's reverse scales. The reverse scales were the only weakness of a dragon. They were unlike the other impervious scales that covered a dragon's body. Everyone knew that the adult dragon's body was covered with tough scales. As for the composition of the scales, no one had yet to research it. The reason was simple. Dragon scales were expensive and rare. They were usually used to make armor strips that protected vital organs. On top of that, very few humans had actually possessed the strength to crack open the dragon scales. As such, research on this matter could hardly proceed. Nevertheless, based on the experience of veteran soldiers, ordinary swords and sabers were completely ineffective against dragons. Rather than injure them, attacking with those weapons only infuriate the dragons, and it would escalate a situation that could be solved via diplomacy into a life-and-death situation. As for bows and arrows, even if they were equipped with the heaviest armor-piercing bullets, they were still incapable of penetrating the tough scales of the dragons. Using magic to defeat dragons was an even laughable proposition. Almost every shade of chromatic dragons possessed an element that they excelled in manipulating. For those particular elements, no ordinary human mage would ever dare to compete against them. Before the magic of the dragons, the magic of humans was akin to drilling wood to start flames. All that was left was to use light cavalry. In fact, throughout the centuries-long conflict between dragons and humans, light cavalry had been humanity's greatest weapon in fighting the dragons. Imagine a dragon that was a few meters tall, and a few tons in weight. Other than the reverse scales on its neck, it had no other weakness. When it flew, it would easily exceed the range of bow and arrows. When it opened its mouth, it was capable of releasing dragon breaths that could raze entire cities to the ground. With a simple chant of its obscure dragon tongue, it could unleash magic that far surpassed that of humans. It was impossible to beat such an enemy via a frontal assault. Thus, the humans were motivated to discover a second weakness of the dragons aside from their reverse scales, treasure. Compared to the greed of humans, the dragons' love for treasures far exceeded them. Mountain-like treasury. Gold, gems, weapons, nothing was excluded from the desire of dragons. Dragons would hoard all their treasures in their lairs, and at times, they would even bury themselves in treasures to sleep. In the eyes of dragons, the treasures were worth even more than their own lives. As a result, the humans formed the light cavalry tactic to take advantage of the dragon's love for treasure. The first step of their tactic was to locate a dragon's lair. Then, they would have a few groups of light cavalrymen lie in ambush nearby all year round. Once the dragon had left its lair, the light cavalrymen would need to be on their guard. Should they spot a human settlement with smoke rising from it, it meant that the dragon was currently invading the settlement. Immediately after noticing this, the light cavalrymen would then use their mobility to their advantage. They would enter the dragon lair, plunder the dragon's treasure, slaughter their young, and commit arson. Usually, their rule was only to take away half of the treasure. Then, they would kill all the young dragons and arrange them in the cave in the cruelest configuration possible. Then, the light cavalrymen would split up, with each person taking a portion of the treasures, and run in different directions. The final result would be mutually assured harm. An ordinary settlement would not have the strength to withstand the dragon's attack. At worst, the settlement would be razed to the ground, and as a result, many would die or be left homeless. However, the dragon would suffer pain of equal proportion as well. Upon its return to its lair, it would realize that half of the treasures that it had painstakingly collected were gone. Worse still, all of their dragon hatchlings were tortured and killed in the lair. The humans would leave the corpses of the dragon hatchlings in the cave, even though they were very valuable. This was done on purpose, as it would serve to provoke the dragon, and at the same time, allow the dragon to experience the loss of family. At this point, depending on the personality of the dragon, some dragons would choose to commit suicide on the spot. After all, with their treasures gone, they no longer had a reason to live. On the other hand, some dragons would lose their rationality and fly to the next settlement to take revenge. However, if the dragon were to do so, the light cavalrymen would rush back into the dragon's lair and take away yet another portion of the dragon's treasures. Depending on the situation, they would even take away the corpses of the dragon hatchlings. Naturally, most dragons' first reaction would be to chase after the light cavalry. However, no matter how fast the dragon flew, they could not catch all of the light cavalry that had spread out in different directions. Those light cavalry were not afraid of death at all. Once they discovered that they were being chased by the giant dragons, they would commit suicide on their horses to prevent the dragons from finding out the whereabouts of their other teammates. There were even some light cavalrymen who would leave one of their arms in the cave and deliberately lure the dragon to them with the smell of blood. If they were to employ this tactic, the cavalrymen who sacrificed themselves would not be carrying any treasure, and would instead leave it with the rest of their teammates. This process would be rinsed and repeated until the dragon realized that attacking human cities was highly uneconomical for it. Thus, the weak humans had finally found a bargaining chip that was capable of threatening the dragons at the cost of their own lives. Such is the subtle equilibrium between man and dragon, who both resided on the same continent. However, in order for the tactic to succeed, strict requirements would have to be imposed for those who wished to be part of the light cavalry unit. In essence, they needed to be veterans who were unafraid of death and had rich combat experience. After all, once deployed, most of them would not be able to return. Some of the light cavalrymen would even be corrupted by the treasures of the dragon. They would steal the treasures and live a carefree life by themselves. The bar of entry was high, their job was highly risky, and they could only be deployed once in most cases. As such, Ardarian had went through great difficulty to train these cavalrymen. Once the ordeal was over, the 1,200 cavalrymen would most likely be reduced to 10 or so members. Ardarian walked to the front of the military formation and raised his sword. Boom, boom. More than 1,000 cavalrymen responded to the Lord's salute. They knocked their pikes on the ground, and the war horses under them neighed. My brave soldiers! Ardarian opened his arms and began his speech. I trust that all of you are familiar with the three heroes of the Pandey Kingdom, Tahir, Rafik, and Carvela. Respectively, they are the role models of mages, amiable warriors, and beautiful heroines of our great kingdom. However, they have been put to eternal slumber within the desert to the north of Longsong Alley. Their bodies remain unfound until now, and they are still slowly rotting away in the wind and sand. Answer me. Who is responsible for this vile act? Ardarian's voice was pale but powerful, and the soldiers' answers echoed in the sky, dragons. Good. Ardarian continued roaring, all of you present here are humanity's greatest weapons against dragons. Are you mentally prepared to play the responsibility imposed on you? Yes. 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 Under the lead of their mother, Max and Mia were heading towards the south. Slowly, the scenery on the ground changed from a desert where it was difficult to find even a blade of grass to an oasis that could be seen occasionally. After flying south for a while, forests gradually came into view, and humans were more commonly sighted. Sometime later, Max appeared in front of what seemed to be a human city. From his lofty position in the sky, the city looked no larger than the little bird beside him. However, based on his prior knowledge as a human, Max was certain that the city was rather huge. The city was built against a mountain. The mountain was like a palm that held up the entire city. A river flowed down from the mountain and ran through the entire city. From his position in the air, Max heard a vague chant coming from the ground. It sounded as if a group of people were shouting in unison. Agatha turned around. This is called Longsong Alley. Let's head down. Then, the three dragons swooped down toward the city. Upon landing on the city walls, the impact from Agatha's huge body immediately blew up several houses. Moreover, the guards on the city wall had also been blown away. However, as Max had already expected such a scene, he pulled Mia back to avoid being hurt by the impact of their mother's landing. Roar! Agatha stood on the city wall and looked down at the city. Then she raised her head and let out a loud roar, as if announcing her arrival to the entire city. Even Max was incapable of withstanding such a strong sound wave. He quickly covered his ears with his hands and covered Mia's ears with his wings. After all, his klutzy sister's reaction was always slightly delayed. He did not know whether or not it was an illusion, but Max saw that the mountain trembled together with his mother's roar. Water droplets jumped up from the river surface as if it was about to boil. It's a dragon. Quick, run. God, please save me. Longsong Alley immediately fell into a state of panic. Most of the people saw the figure of the dragon were stunned for a second. Then, they turned around and ran like ants. One by one, they rushed to the other side of their city, hoping to escape from the dragon's wrath. Some of the weaker humans went mad under Agatha's roar. They crumpled on the ground and began muttering incoherent nonsense. Roar. Like his mother, Max also roared. However, as a young dragon, Max's roar naturally not as loud as his mother's. If his mother's roar was described as earth-shattering, then Max's roar was like an irritating alarm. Roar. After watching her brother's actions, Mia imitated him and roared as well. However, with Mia's body size, the sound she made was weaker than a common house pet's. Not here, Agatha commented. Remember, children, these are the lowest class of humans. You can eat them if you're hungry, but if it's treasure you desire, don't bother attacking them. They won't drop any gold coins. Where I'm about to bring you to is where the lord of these humans resides at. The lord is extremely wealthy, and he possesses a great wealth of treasures, hee. Agatha spread her wings as she spoke. Whoosh! A strong wind blew over Max's head, and Agatha flew up once more. A lord, huh? Max followed his mother, and at the same time, he looked around for the lord that she had mentioned. Sure enough, this is a medieval world, and the existence of a city lord is to be expected. Max turned around and looked at the entire city. Their terror aside, most of the citizens looked emaciated, and their streets were dirty and dilapidated. The horses that were dragging goods had gone berserk, and as a result, most of their carriages had flipped over. This city looks a little poor. Max thought to himself. However, upon spotting the lord, Max immediately understood why this was the case. Most of the income the city generated had been funneled into building up their military. At this moment, he had already reached the lord's inner castle. The inner castle was the city within the city. It was surrounded by higher and thicker walls, and it was the lord's living area. A large army was lined up neatly there, and everyone was riding on top of a horse. Dragon. A dragon is approaching. Run. Don't panic. We are soldiers, we have to fight until. Oh my God. There are 3 of them. Run. Oh great goddess of order, Eunomia. Please bless me in defeating these great evils. Naturally, the neat military formation that was formed just moments ago had collapsed the moment they saw the dragons. Many of them had fallen off their horses, as they shouted and scurried away. A few soldiers raised their weapons and pointed them at Max, trembling. However, once Max locked eyes with them, the soldiers immediately threw away their weapons and ran away. Some even hid under the horses' stomachs and cowered in fear. It reminded Max of hiding under a table during an earthquake. Do you see, my children? Before our might, the tin cans that these soldiers are wearing mean nothing. Agatha mocked the soldiers and roared once again. Roar. Mia roared as well. She seemed to enjoy roaring very much, and she would clap her front paws from time to time. Naturally, Max roared as well, although the thought of scaring the human soldiers did not give him much sense of accomplishment. However, Max noticed that the horses that the soldiers were riding on did not seem to be frightened. Most of the horses were still standing in place. Every once in a while, they would even lock gazes with the dragons. Regardless, they had never lowered their heads, and they did not run away. Why aren't these horses afraid of us? With such a question in mind, Max turned his head and took a quick glance at his surroundings. Some distance away, Max found a training ground for horses. In there, Max noticed there were several dragons carved out of wood. They were placed in the spots where the horses ate. There were gongs and drums scattered on the ground, and their battered surface indicated that they were used regularly. Desensitization training. Max knew of this method. In ancient times, in order to prevent the horses from being timid in war, every warhorse was trained from a young age. One such training that the war horses had undergone was desensitization training. The horses would be sent to attack scarecrow that were carrying knives, spears, or sticks. Only by doing so would the warhorses remain calm in the battlefield. But it seems that the desensitization training for horses of this world is a little different. Under normal circumstances, the desensitization training for horses was targeted at the enemy humans. As for the horses in this city, however, they were trained to be desensitized towards dragons. In other words, the soldiers before them were specialists meant to deal with dragons. At this point, Max noticed a person walking out among the soldiers. That person was wearing a full set of Milan plate armor. His footsteps were steady, and as he walked forward, he lifted his helmet and looked up at them. The man was probably in his 70s. His beard was white, but his physique remained strong. He looked like he had exercised a lot when he was young. That person knelt on one knee and with a sincere expression, he asked, "Dear Lady Agatha, may I ask why you have brought two young masters or ladies here?" Max frowned. This person seems to be educated. He must be the so-called lord. Moreover, this lord is rather smart. Now that we dragons have invaded his inner castle, he's trying to bargain his way out. He knows that violence would lead him nowhere. Ardarian? You are still alive, huh? You're really tenacious, hee. Agatha recognized the lord and thus, she called out the lord's name immediately. This was the first time that Max had heard his mother speaking the human tongue. He did not expect his mother to know the tongue. It was rather surprising for Max. Ardarian looked calm on the surface. However, underneath his calm exterior, his hands behind his back were trembling uncontrollably. The relationship of humans and dragons were like mice and cats, both physically and mentally. However, Ardarian knew that if he were to flee the scene, he would be sprayed to death by Agatha's dragon breath. He and Agatha were old acquaintances. They had met a few times before. Unlike some dragons, Agatha had a gentle temperament. Like all dragons, however, Agatha also liked treasures. As a result of these two characteristics, whenever Ardarian had been woken up from his slumber by her dragon roar, he would hand Agatha his treasures to make her leave. To Ardarian, Agatha's behavior was more akin to a bandit's. However, unlike normal bandits, Agatha could not be eliminated nor defeated easily. Ardarian recalled the last time he handed Agatha his treasure. It should have been last year. Agatha most likely isn't here for treasure this time. Regarding this matter, Ardarian had always kept a secret stash of treasure ready in his room, also he could satisfy the dragon during any of her sudden visits. However, the difference this time was that Agatha had two dragon hatchlings with her. This is probably a demonstration. She's probably telling me that these are her children, and she's warning me not to think of funny ideas in the future. Lady Agatha, I have prepared some gifts for you. Ardarian shot a glance to his attendant. A moment later, a chest of treasure was hurriedly brought to the scene. I approve of your straightforwardness, Ardarian. With that, Agatha flicked her claws and opened the chest. It was filled with shiny gold coins and colorful jewelry. A ceremonial sword made of pure gold was inserted in the chest, and there was a jewelry necklace hanging on it. Max watched from the side. He understood all the messages that his mother had taught him to this point. There was no need to kill all the humans. It was best to keep them alive. The village would serve as a source of camel meat. On the other hand, the city would serve as a source of treasure. However, being the proud dragon she was, Agatha did not say those words aloud. Nevertheless, Max still understood. Before I leave, I have another question, Agatha stated. Longsong Alley doesn't usually have troops stationed here. For what purpose are you gathering troops now? Gulp. Ardarian gulped audibly. Sure enough, Agatha had caught on to this matter. Naturally, the troops were meant to serve as a means to deal with Agatha. However, in this moment, he could not tell Agatha up front that he had gathered these troops to deal with her, right? Therefore, Ardarian took a deep breath and replied. Lady Agatha, this army is used to deal with mountain bandits. For your information, if the mountain bandits are too rampant, I will not be able to gather enough treasures for you. To deal with bandits. Ha ha ha. Agatha's laughter echoed throughout the city. Then, Agatha faced Max. Max, my child, what do you think? Facing his mother's vertical pupils, Max exhaled. He knew that his mother was testing him. He's lying. Max spoke fluent human language and answered, these warhorses won't run when they see us. They are specially trained to be used against dragons. The air froze for a few seconds. Cold sweat broke out on Aldarian's head, and his heart thumped faster and faster. He did not even have the time to realize that the dragon hatchling speaking the human tongue. His most pressing concern at that moment was that his lie had been completely exposed. These warhorses are exactly as what the dragon hatchling has mentioned. They've undergone desensitization training since young, and they've been trained to face a dragon without any fright. They were meant to be used by a group of specialist infantrymen. They were meant to be used against you dragons. How audacious. Hee. Agatha was not shocked. After all, she knew the truth about this army from the very beginning. She had only asked Max to teach her child a lesson. Agatha continued, Lord Ardarian, you must have spent a fortune to raise this army, right? I won't kill you. It's not like I'll get any benefit from killing you anyway. Get your soldiers off their horses. I want all of them for myself. As soon as Agatha finished speaking, the soldiers who were still sitting on the horses quickly got off their horses and ran for their lives. Boom. A huge dragon breath was spat out from Agatha's mouth, and the strong light drowned everything. Even Max could not help but close his eyes. As expected, the ancient dragon's power was so strong that it had taken only mere milliseconds for her to fire such an intense dragon breath. Once the dragon's breath ended, only a pile of charcoal remained on the ground. Had Max not seen the horses with his very eyes, he would not have recognized the charred creatures before him. Lightning was still flowing from the corner of Agatha's mouth as she licked her lips and retracted her breath. Then she said, Ardarian, why did you do such a stupid thing? The money you've used to build this army is enough to exchange for a few years of peace. Even since ancient times, all armies were founded from real gold and silver. If soldiers were to participate in labor whilst serving, the costs of maintaining the army would be reduced. However, in doing so, the combat prowess of the army would also decline. On the other hand, if an army was built completely on the funds of the Lord, it would cost an exorbitant amount to maintain them. Moreover, compared to the residents living in the city, most of the soldiers present looked extremely well nourished. The weapons in their hands were clearly of high workmanship, and each of them were equipped with a nice set of armor. As for the horses that had just died, they were also special horses that had undergone training since they were young. The building of this army had undoubtedly racked up astronomical costs. Should the money be used as a tribute to Agatha, it could indeed be exchanged for a long period of peace. Max had the same question as his mother, and thus, he turned his gaze to Lord Ardarian as well. Yes, Ardarian paused for a long time before answering, there are 3 heroes in the kingdom. They are Tahir, Carvella, and Rafik. You killed them, so I want to avenge them. I built this army for this very reason. Hearing such an answer, Agatha snorted. What rubbish, I don't know any of these people. I told you I'm a reasonable dragon, killing people won't bring me any benefits. The last time I killed someone was a few years ago. Ardarian suddenly raised his head, and widened his eyes. You didn't kill them. Agatha spread her wings and raised her head to roar. Do you actually think that I, a proud dragon, will lie to you? Max dared not speak. He did not know who Carvella and Rafik were. However, he was very familiar with the name Tahir. He was one of the 3 adventurers that he had killed in the battle of existence. In that case, Rafik was the swordsman, and Carvella was the female archer. They seemed to be renowned individuals in this world. I'm the one who killed these 3 people, but the humans thought that it was Agatha had done the deed. Max nodded. This is to my benefit. At least throughout his period as a dragon hatchling, he did not want to make too many enemies for himself. Life was already hard enough as it was. However, as Agatha had been slandered, she was extremely angry. The periosteum on her opened wings trembled slightly, and lightning coursed through her entire body. Idiot! Idiot! Don't pin all the bad things that happened to you on me. Tell me, why do you think I did it? Ardarian quickly knelt on the ground. Lady Agatha, please calm down. The main reason is that the three of them are extremely powerful humans. The day they formed a party, they were instantly bestowed the title of the Three Heroes. But ever since they passed through the desert, all news of them had disappeared. After some investigation, it was determined that they had died. Aside from you, I really can't think of any other creature that is strong enough to defeat them. You must know, Agatha, you are the strongest creature within the northern region of the kingdom. After hearing these words, Max nodded. That's right. I would come to the same conclusion if I were in his shoes. If anything were to be blamed, they could only blame the bad luck of the three individuals. Underestimating their enemy was one issue, but encountering me was their greatest misfortune. After all, no one would have expected a dragon hatchling to be capable of killing three of the kingdom's strongest individuals. TCH. Agatha let out a dissatisfied breath. Human, you must pay the price for slandering a dragon. I admit my mistake, Ardarian replied. I will prepare the treasure to apologize. Agatha suddenly jumped down from the city wall and stared at the soldiers with great interest. No, this time, I don't want the treasure. Get your soldiers to line up. Group up based on your hometowns. After saying that, Agatha smiled. Accept the inspection of a dragon. Generally speaking, conscription was done according on one's hometown. Prior to conscription, the soldiers might have been friends, relatives, or even lovers. As such, in order to prevent the soldiers from forming a clique among themselves, the superiors would deliberately mess up their order and surround each soldier with strangers. However, Agatha had ordered the soldiers to group up based on their hometowns. Those from the same hometown were standing together. Max did not understand the purpose of his mother's action. Similarly, the Lord and his soldiers who were nervously lining up did not understand the purpose of the dragon's order as well. However, since it was an order from Agatha, no one dared to resist. Agatha's cruelty was completely imprinted in everyone's heart. With just one breath, she had wiped out all of the warhorses in an instant. If Agatha was unhappy, she could blow them away with just a single breath. No one would be able to escape death. In a short while, the soldiers had all lined up. Report. Report to Lady Agatha. We have already gathered in order according to our hometown. Please give us your orders. The soldiers said with a trembling voice. Very good. Agatha replied, now, report the names of your villages one by one. Miendon. Fort Ambition. Barrack. One by one, the small groups reported their origins. Max whispered their hometowns' names together with them. His understanding of this world was still too little. As such, this was a very good opportunity for him to learn more about the world. At the very least, he would not get lost once his mother left him. Deer Heart Village. It was not until the soldiers reported the name of this particular village that Agatha slowly opened her eyes. Deer Heart Village was where Agatha had brought Max to earlier. It was also a village that Agatha had kept in captivity. Its main purpose was to provide Agatha with an endless supply of camel meat to eat. They had a rather strange relationship. Under normal circumstances, Agatha would not kill the people in this village, but she would also not allow them to flee from her captivity. As long as Deer Heart Village continued to provide her with camels, Agatha would not make trouble for them. However, there were exceptions to her behavior. For example, in order to demonstrate the hierarchy of their relationship, Agatha had ordered his son to kill one of the villagers to make an example of them. Agatha stretched out her claws and pointed at the soldiers of Deer Heart Village. You can leave now. After being momentarily stunned, the soldiers from Deer Heart Village then fled in panic. Continue reporting. Agatha said. Fort Silver Blade. Sarian City. Marion City. Fort Dragon Claw. Agatha opened her eyes again. Stop, repeat what you just said. What's the name of your village? Fort Dragon Claw. Lady Agatha, this is our village. Before that person finished speaking, a dragon breath was unleashed. In an instant, the group of people that belonged to Fort Dragon Claw had been murdered by Agatha. Fort Dragon Claw, huh? Hee hee, I know that place. Someone chopped off my mother's claws there. I don't have any feelings for my mother, but I will kill everyone from that village. Agatha was indeed a reasonable dragon. She made sure to explain her reasons for murdering the soldiers from Fort Dragon Claw. Once everyone had reported the place of their origin, the scene fell into silence. Max noticed Agatha's gaze falling on him. Max, you said that you wanted to prove that you have no compassion towards humans. Max nodded. Yes, Mother. Then I'll leave these people to you. Max flew to the sky above the inner castle. A group of shivering humans who dared not escape huddled together, and they were looking at him in panic. According to Mother, these people are now mine to deal with. Naturally, Max knew what his mother meant. In Deerheart Village, Max had let go of a baby girl. Max thought that it was worth it because the baby girl had good aptitude for magic, and he believed that he could use her for his own purposes in the future. However, at the same time, his actions had aroused the suspicion of his mother. As such, Max needed to torture the humans below to prove to his mother that he was a normal dragon. However, this was only part of the reason for torturing them. At the same time, it would also serve to demonstrate his strength to the humans. After all, Agatha would leave him and Mia one day. Once she left, the two young dragons would be targeted by the humans. As such, before such a situation could arise, Max needed to beat the humans into submission. He needed to make them tremble whenever they heard the word dragon. He needed to make it so that even when they were facing dragon hatchlings, they would steer away from them. Lastly, he also needed to make sure that he did not kill everyone. After all, they were the last of the poor lord's possessions. In order to obtain more treasures from the lord, he needed to keep his subordinates alive. Based on these considerations, Max thought long and hard about what he should do next. You lowly humans. You slandered my mother and blamed the dragon race for crimes that we have not committed. So you shall pay the price. But I, Max Agatha Hill Alexander, have also inherited my mother's kindness. So, only half of the people here will be killed. You are now arranged into small groups according to your hometowns. In that case, half of each group will live, and half of you will die. I'll leave all of you to choose the sacrifices among yourselves. You have 1 minute. Let's begin. Once Max finished his last sentence, the crowd below became lively. A cacophony of people counting, arguing, and crying could be heard. After a minute had passed, each group was further separated into subgroups. Those who would live stood in the distance. Those who were left in the middle were those who were willing to sacrifice themselves. Max took a look. Those who had voluntarily sacrificed themselves were most likely old people, fathers, older brothers, and so on. Max had expected this outcome. At the same time, it was also the last shred of mercy Max had given them. Thunder elementals, heed my call. Transform into arrows and pierce through their chests. Max was chanting the incantation for a lightning arrow, the most basic thunder magic for red dragons. It collected the lightning elementals in the air, forged them into the shape of an arrow, and fired them forward to deal massive damage. Bzzzt. Following his first shot, a person fell to the ground with a muffled sound and his body was paralyzed. Bzzzt. Bzzzt. Lightning arrows fell from the sky one after another, and the people below lowered their heads and accepted their fate. This was the difference between humans and dragons. Generally speaking, a human needed to study for a few years before they could use a spell like lightning arrow. Moreover, lightning arrow was the most basic type of thunder magic. Even the brightest among humans needed a year to master the spell, and some pitiful ones were incapable of learning it, even if they were to devote their entire lives studying it. Meanwhile, red dragons were capable of casting the spell since birth. "You are hiding your strength." Max suddenly heard Agatha's cold voice behind him. Max did not expect his mother to see through him. In fact, ever since he had used the battle of existence to kill Tahir, Max's magical aptitude had improved by leaps and bounds. In fact, in terms of thunder magic, Max felt that he was comparable to his own mother, who was an ancient dragon. While his spells might not be as powerful, in terms of the number of spells he knew, Max was capable of beating most red dragons at this point. However, he did not want to show his true strength. After all, acting like an alien was not welcomed by the red dragons. "But now that Mother has seen through me, I have no reason to hold back." "As you wish, Mother," Max replied. "I'll use my full strength. Thunder elementals, heed my call. Transform into arrows and cover the sky. Lightning arrow rain." The ancient and obscure dragon tongue resounded in the sky above the inner castle. This language was difficult to pronounce and difficult to understand. It was not designed to allow dragons to communicate with each other. Dragons were mostly arrogant and they prided themselves in operating alone. There were very few situations where they would have a need to communicate with other dragons. Most of the time, the dragon tongue was used to facilitate the recitation of magic. The dragon tongue was concise and straight to the point, and thus, it was the best language for reciting spells. Therefore, the incantations that had taken Tahir several proses to finish chanting would only take Max a few seconds to finish. Moreover, no humans would be able to understand Max's chants. The obscure dragon tongue itself was already so profound that it would leave deep impressions on humans, not to mention that the tongue could not be spoken with the same pronunciation from the thin human throats. As for a text-based version of the dragon language, it had never been discovered nor been researched before. Dragons possessed the ability to inherit memories. As such, they did not need books to impart knowledge. Even since birth, they had already possessed the knowledge of several generations of dragons. Moreover, every time they slept, their strength would also increase. At this moment, to the humans below, the sounds that were coming off of Max's mouth were like the chimes of a bell. As he watched his soldiers get pierced through the heart by lightning one after another, Ardarian clenched his hands tightly, but he sighed helplessly. He had no other choice but to follow the whims of the dragon hatchling. He had originally decided that no matter what happened, he would not escape. He would bear witness to the whole ordeal with his own two eyes. This was partly to understand the attacks of the dragon hatchling. The spell that the dragon hatchling used was the same as what was written in the textbook for fighting against dragons. The only magic that ordinary red dragon hatchlings could use was the lightning arrow of the thunder element. It was said that it was one of the simpler spells of thunder magic. Nevertheless, it was still a high wall to overcome for many humans who yearned for magic. The root cause of this phenomenon was that magic did not originate from humans, but rather, humans had learned it from other creatures. Only by learning the language of the elves could one have the opportunity to use the magic of the elves. As for the language of the dragons, humans have made little to no progress on that end. However, after the first few shots, Ardarian noticed Agatha saying something to the dragon hatchling. Following this, the dragon hatchling rose to a higher position. Then, an even faster and stranger incantation was read out from the dragon hatchling's mouth. "What is that?" Dark clouds gathered in the sky. The rolling dark clouds were like a huge windmill that constantly rotated. At the same time, all sunlight was blocked from entering Longsong Alley, and it felt as if night had descended over the city. Although Ardarian had never studied magic, he understood its principles somewhat. The dark clouds meant that there was a storm approaching, and the clouds were filled with an almost endless amount of thunder and water elementals. In other words, the young dragon was brewing something. A disaster-level magic would soon befall them. Lightning arrow rain. Max stated the final words in the dragon tongue. The moment his chant ended, thunder elementals rapidly descended from the sky and came to Max's side. They intertwined and formed the shape of a chrysalis. Then they rotated and contracted, turning into a thin and long arrow-like shape. One lightning arrow was enough to illuminate half of Max's body. As such, the thousands of lightning arrows that lit up Longsong Alley had illuminated the dark clouds, making them look like soft, fluffy cotton balls. In contrast to the picturesque scene in the air, the scene below was like hell. Even Max did not expect the power of the lightning arrow rain to be so great. It was the same lightning arrow rain that Taher had cast. However, by using the dragon tongue to cast the spell, its effects were amplified. Although Max had promised his mother that he would not hold back, he had never expected the change in languages to affect the power of the spell this much. At this point, there was no way to explain it to his mother. Max waved his claws. Instantly, thousands of lightning arrows shot down. The boom of thunder surrounded Max. He was momentarily deafened, and he could not hear anything. It was as if he was isolated from the world. Upon looking back, he noticed that Agatha was watching the scene with great interest. A hint of surprise flashed in her widened eyes. Pure red dragons were not afraid of thunder. Even under the deafening boom of thunder, true red dragons would treat the explosion as if it were some kind of sweet melody. As such, Mia was very happy. She clapped her hands and flew back and forth among the lightning arrows, and at times, she would even let the arrows hit her. She was like a naughty child that ran about in the rain on purpose. Boom, boom. Whenever each lightning arrow made contact with the ground, huge explosions would ensue. In fact, after the first bolt fell, all the soldiers who had volunteered to die below had died. The subsequent arrows that struck them had merely deformed them until they were beyond recognition. Pieces or strips of charred coal danced in the air, and the amount of soot that was generated was immense. By the time the rain of arrows had stopped, a large semicircular crater had already appeared on the ground. There was nothing in the pit. The soldiers, along with the charred remains of the warhorses lying on the ground, had all been vaporized by the high temperature brought by the lightning arrows. The soldiers who were watching from afar had also suffered many accidental injuries. Smoke, charred flesh, and pained sobs. Once all of it had dissipated, Max spread his wings and said, "This is your punishment." Ardarian's legs went weak, and he almost fell to the ground. This is lightning arrow rain. It's one of the most advanced thunder spells. Only a few humans in history have managed to cast it. Taher once performed this spell and defeated the enemy's vanguard. Is this an adult dragon? No, it's merely a hatchling. How can it cast such a spell? Ardarian finally understood. Agatha need not do anything. Agatha's child alone was already strong enough to annihilate everyone present. Thank you, Lord Dragon Hatchling, for punishing us. Ardarian took the lead and bowed to Max. He knew that he must not mount any resistance. Otherwise, with Longsong Alley's current military might, they would be wiped off the map by the Dragon Hatchling. Moreover, the soldiers who were lucky enough to survive were already scared out of their wits. They quickly imitated Ardarian and knelt down towards Max. Lord Dragon Hatchling, I do not currently possess any more treasures. Ardarian said to Max, but I am willing to give you my sword as a gift. Ardarian had dealt with dragons many times, and thus, he had some understanding of the temper of dragons, especially the temper of red dragons. Slaughtering humans brought no pleasure to red dragons, and thus, they would not kill without reason. Even if they were to kill, they would most likely not obtain a satisfactory amount of treasure. Therefore, Ardarian was certain that the dragon hatchling had not been satisfied by the death of his soldiers. However, as he had already handed his treasures to Agatha moments ago, he had nothing left to offer the dragon hatchling. All he could think of was the longsword hanging on his waist. Upon this thought, he took out the longsword at his waist and handed it over with both hands. Max glanced at it. In truth, Max felt that he had already done enough. There was no need to further aggravate the situation. Max had already massacred more than 500 humans and gained his mother's approval. His destructive and powerful spell had already served as a demonstration of his power to the humans. In the future, even if Agatha were to leave them, no one would dare to disturb him or Mia. Moreover, in the ethics of dragons, it was inappropriate to collect wealth before their parents. Even if he were to accept the longsword, he would still need to hand it over to his mother in the end. Therefore, Max shook his head. I have no need of treasures. I'm merely giving you a lesson. As long as you remember this day forever, it will be enough. Never forget what you have experienced today. Ardarian heaved a sigh of relief. The sword was the sword of the commander of Longsong Alley. Had it not been for the fact that he had run out of treasures, Ardarian would never have offered it as a tribute to the dragons. After all, if he were to do so, it would deal a devastating blow to his reputation once outsiders learned of it. Handing over the sword of the commander was equivalent to giving up the authority of Longsong Alley. It was an extremely desperate move. Fortunately, the dragon hatchling had declined his offer. Roar! Agatha let out another roar as if she was very satisfied with the situation. Remember, this is the consequence of slandering a dragon. After giving her last warning, she spread her wings and left with her children. While he was in the air, Max turned back to take a look at the city. Although they were already high up in the air, the crater that he had created with his magic could still be seen clearly. The power of dragons had far surpassed his expectations. Aside from that, Max also realized something important while he was slaughtering the soldiers. He did not seem to have any guilt. Logically speaking, although he had become a red dragon, his heart had used and soul was still meant to be that of a human's. However, even after killing so many humans in one go, Max did not feel uncomfortable at all. Perhaps I've finally become a dragon, both physically and mentally. In truth, much of a human's emotions were affected by the physiology of their bodies. The secretion of hormones would directly affect the mood and even the thoughts of a person. Females would feel inexplicable anxiety during their menstrual period, pregnant women would become more prone to hunger, and those who regularly stayed up late would be more prone to depression. These were all examples of the effects of hormones on the human body. Max suspected that if we're to continue living as a dragon, it would not be long before he would become like Mia, unsympathetic towards humans. He might even be in the mood to play around while humans were dying all around him. Max heaved a mental sigh. Back in the desert, in Agatha's underground lair. Explain yourself, Max. Why do you know that spell? The first thing Agatha did upon returning to the lair was to ask Max about the lightning arrow rain spell that he had cast. Max had already thought of a plan along the way home. He would take advantage of the pride of the dragons by praising Agatha, and once he had lowered her guard, she would accept his excuses more easily. That's because as your child, I inherited a small part of your strength. One morning some time ago, I felt as if my body was connected to the memories of our predecessors, and I suddenly learned of this spell. There was no loophole in Max's explanation. A pure dragon was born with the memories of their ancestors, after all. During the growth of a dragon hatchling, these memories would slowly become clearer, and their magical abilities would gradually awaken. Haha, well done, Max. I have to admit that your performance today has amazed me. Agatha praised him, her tone more gentle than ever. Thank you for the compliment, Mother. I will work harder in the future. Max nodded and thanked her. Naturally, Max knew how hard it was to get praise from a dragon, especially when that dragon was his mother. Through his mother's gentle tone, Max knew that his mother had well and truly acknowledged his magical aptitude this time. Of course you need to work harder. You need to grow up, learn more spells. Agatha started off slowly, but halfway through her speech, she suddenly changed topics. After all, both of you have to leave my side now. What? Although Max had expected his mother to abandon him and Mia one day, he did not expect that day to come so soon. Generally speaking, mother dragons would raise their dragon hatchlings until they had become teen dragons before leaving them. Max and Mia were only dragon hatchlings at this moment. Because both of you are now qualified to live independently. Agatha explained with a wry smile. You killed those 3 heroes, didn't you, Max? Max replied, it wasn't me. He would not admit it even if he was beaten to death. Although he did not know how his mother had guessed it, he refused to admit it. Otherwise, should his mother learn of Tahir's strength in the future, she would definitely suspect how a dragon hatchling such as himself had managed to beat such a powerful foe. If Agatha were to learn of Max's battle of existence, the consequences might be disastrous. Perhaps, she would even kill him on the spot. Never doubt the kinship between dragons, and never doubt the red dragon's rejection of aliens. Those who were capable of using the battle of existence were considered aliens as well. Agatha suddenly stretched her entire head over and pressed it against the tip of Max's nose. Although he was Agatha's child, it was the first time Max had such close contact with his mother. The pair of lava-like eyes were staring at him, her sharp fangs clearly visible. After a moment of silence, Agatha stood up. Hee, I see that you're not a liar. Phew. Max heaved a sigh of relief once he saw that his mother no longer doubted him. Their parting was so sudden. Agatha, who had been by their side just moments ago, was now packing up her treasures. Agatha had many treasures, piled up to the size of Agatha herself. It was not an easy task to pack them all up. This was the first time Max had seen his mother being so diligent. She shuttled back and forth between her treasure piles, and sorted her treasures neatly. Max walked up and helped to pack up as they were still family. However, he was pushed aside by Agatha's fierce gaze. Sure enough, dragons would never allow others to touch their treasures, not even their own children. By the standards of dragons, losing a child was of little consequence, as they could give birth to new ones. If they were to die, then they would be free from all worldly desires, and they would no longer experience any pain. However, once their treasures were gone, then they would be well and truly gone. Mom. In the silence, Mia suddenly burst into tears. This was not the first time Mia had cried. As a giant dragon, this was a very abnormal phenomenon. Mom. I don't understand, Mia said. Did we do something wrong? No. Then why are you abandoning us? I is our family. Not good enough. This was not an issue for Max. After all, they were dragons. Since they were dragons, they had to act according to the moral standards of dragons. For other creatures, love and affection were a means of survival. In a group of animals, those who ignored their young would result in their young being killed by their predators. However, those who had feelings and were soft-hearted towards their young would protect them. Those that had survived would inherit the behavior of their parents, and thus, they would protect their young as well. Just like breathing and eating, emotions were not just a physiological phenomenon, they were a necessity for the continuation of the species. Dragons, on the other hand, did not need emotions. After all, dragons were at the top of the food chain. Even if a dragon hatchling were to be abandoned at a young age, they would still be able to survive. Therefore, dragons rarely had deep kinship. This was something that Max had realized ever since becoming a dragon. Perhaps it was the price for being strong. Those who excelled in something would usually display different behavior from those who were average. Humans liked treasures because treasures meant stability, freedom, and comfort. However, for dragons, it was clear that collecting dragons would give no merit to them. After all, the concept of living expenses did not apply to dragons. Nevertheless, almost all dragons still adored treasures. Agatha was obviously impatient. She stood up and spread her wings, as if she was threatening her children. Enough. Shut up. I should never have given birth to both of you oddballs in the first place. I've been here for far too long to raise the both of you. I need to move. And the only possessions I'll bring with me are my lovely treasures, not you two. How will you live in the future? This is something both of you have to figure out by yourselves. With that, Agatha suddenly twisted her body and swept her thick tail at Mia, slamming her heavily against the wall. Since when did great red dragons require someone to look over us? I, Agatha Alexia Galenstrosi, have struggled to survive ever since I was a child. Forget my parents, I don't even have any brothers or sisters. They're all dead. Only the ones who survive in adversity are worthy of being a dragon. This is the task that is given to us by the dragon god Tiamat. Do you understand? If you understand, then rest well. Tomorrow. I will set off tomorrow. If you can make a name for yourself in the future, perhaps we will meet again one day. Or perhaps, I'll spot your body parts in a human auction one day. Hee hee. Following her lecture, Agatha returned to her pile of treasures and laid down. The pain from her mother's tail sweep, and her harsh words had silenced Mia's cries. She buried her head and covered her whole body with her wings. Sigh. There was nothing Max could do in regards to the domestic violence that had just occurred. He had no intention of challenging his mother's patience in that moment. The most he could do was to reach out his claws to pat Mia's head. Don't cry, don't cry. Mother might leave you, but I won't. Max comforted her casually and wrapped his wings tightly around Mia's body. Nevertheless, no matter how he tried to comfort his sister, it was to no avail. Mia continued to cry. How did things turn out this way? I'm a human, but I'm acting more like a dragon. This crybaby Mia is acting more like a normal human. This thought flashed through Max's mind. However, he quickly dismissed it. When Mia ate humans, she did not hesitate. She even thought that it was fun to kill humans. She was merely unusual in the sense that she depended heavily on her family. She was just as unusual as her brother, Max. Early the next morning, Max was woken up by a gust of wind. Agatha had already spread her wings, packed up her treasures, and flew away. Pulling out his wings from under Mia's head, Max walked around the cave. Not bad. The originally crowded cave immediately became spacious. I can make a sofa here. Let me think. I can grab a few sheep and shave their fur. It's not good for my body to sleep on rocks all the time. I might as well open a bathtub there. There's a drought of water in the desert, and I haven't taken a bath since I was born. Now that mother is gone, I can do whatever I want. But where should I obtain the water from? I might as well borrow some from Longsong Alley. But I definitely transport the water here by myself. This wouldn't fit my image of a dragon. Damn it, I should have convinced mother to leave some of the horses alive. While Max was thinking about how he should renovate the lair, he suddenly stepped on something. It was a bulging sack the size of a basketball. Max opened the sack. Shiny gold coins flowed out. This. Max weighed the pile of gold coins in his hand. There were more than 1,000 of them. As for the source of the bag of gold coins, without needing a second thought, Max was immediately certain that it was Agatha's treasure. Did mother forget? Max wondered aloud. However, upon recalling her meticulous behavior from the previous day, he doubted that Agatha had forgotten about her bag of gold coins. The only explanation was that she had intentionally left the bag behind. In a sense, it could be considered as the startup funds for the 2 dragon hatchlings. How heavy? Max sighed. The gold coins were probably made of pure gold, and each of them had a satisfying weight in one's hand. In the human kingdom, the amount of money that Agatha had left them was probably enough for 3 generations to live in peace. However, for dragon hatchlings, it was just the right amount for them to lie on top of it, or for them to use as blankets. While looking in the direction in which Agatha had left, Max sighed heavily. Although she had said some rather harsh words, she had still secretly left behind a minor fortune for her children. The desert was still empty and yellow. However, if one looked carefully, one could see a few fat camels wandering in the desert without any defenses. They must be the tribute that Deer Heart Village had sent out. Mia, it's time to get up. As Max spoke, he picked up the sack and poured all the gold coins onto Mia. There was a loud crash. Mia shook her head and opened her eyes. Upon noticing the gold coins surrounding her body, Mia's eyes lit up. Mia, are you feeling better? Max felt that Mia would like these treasures. After all, glittering gold coins were a staple favorite of dragons. Ha ha, ha ha. This was the first time Mia had ever touched a gold coin with her own hands. Thus, she wagged her tail happily at the sight of the treasures. Like a child playing in water, she constantly threw the gold coins up in the air, and allowed them to hit her body. Max doted on Mia as well. He helped pick up the gold coins and threw it at Mia's body. After her moment of joy, Mia suddenly looked around. Mother! Mother, are you there? No one answered. Mia lowered her head again and kicked away the gold coins beside her. TSK, so hard to please. Max complained in his heart. However, based on his experience of coaxing children in his previous life, at this time, all he needed was prepare her a delicious meal, and she would instantly feel better, just like magic. Do you have anything you want to eat? Max asked. I have no appetite. Camel. This time, I won't snatch it from you. I'll even give you its thigh. How about it? Mia did not answer. Instead, she wrapped herself up with her wings. She looked like a dragon dumpling. Oh, right. Max suddenly remembered something. Have you ever eaten roasted meat made with spices? Max suddenly realized that although Red Dragon was the only dragon race that liked to eat cooked food, that was only true when the raw meat was roasted. As for things like pepper and spices, red dragons had never tried them. After all, it was already good enough for a dragon to know how to cook well. Why would they care so much about cooking? Most of the dragons thought that if they had the time to study cooking, it would be better to go out and snatch more treasure. Therefore, Max dared to bet that even in Mia's inherited memories, she had never enjoyed roasted meat that was meticulously cooked. Spices? What's that? Mia was silent for a moment before she asked. Max chuckled. As expected, Mia has never heard of such a thing. As an independent young man, Max had learned to cook since kindergarten. The problem now, however, is where I should get these spices from. Dragons. Indeed, they are not the type of creature to lie. Ardarian put his hands on his forehead and buried his head on the table. He had already repeated the day's events dozens of times in his mind. Agatha's words constantly replayed in his mind. Considering that dragons were a very proud race, even if some dragons would use conspiracies and tricks. However, most of the tricks they played were used to deal with other dragons. Dragons very rarely lied to the weak humans. According to Agatha, Agatha did not kill the 3 heroes. Someone else had killed the 3 heroes. However, Ardarian still could not figure out just what kind of powerful existence in the northern region had managed to kill Tahir. Could it be that dragon hatchling? A possibility suddenly came to his mind. It was the dragon hatchling that could use lightning arrow rain. Could it be that young dragon that killed Tahir? However, this thought was quickly rejected by Ardarian. Yes, that young dragon was indeed very powerful. It had casually used a spell that humans could not even grasp. But today, that young dragon had also mentioned something. I'll use my full strength. This was what the young dragon had said to Agatha. The dragon is still young. There's no way that it's capable of telling lies. Moreover, no child dragon would dare to lie to their mother. Therefore, what the young dragon stated at that time should be the truth. In other words, the dragon hatchling had used its full strength to unleash the lightning arrow rain earlier. I doubt that level of strength is enough to defeat Tahir, who excelled in thunder magic. The dragon hatchling does not seem to be the culprit. Then who else could it be? Knock knock knock. There was a knock on the door. My liege, we found Carvella's body. What? Ardarian quickly got up and walked out of the room. Not a single day had passed where he did not send out scouts to look for the remains of the three heroes. However, no matter how hard they tried, they could not find the remains of the three heroes. The last people who saw the three heroes were the villagers from Deerheart village. However, they did not gain any useful information there. The villagers said the same thing. They said that they had seen three strangers passing by the village from afar, and they did not have any interaction with the village. Nevertheless, they had finally found Carvella's body. Ardarian walked into a room. A chunk of charcoal was laid across a table. The charcoal had vaguely made out a human shape. Had it not been for the tag on her body, no one would have recognized it as Carvella. As it had been left in the desert for a long time, Carvella's corpse was covered in a layer of yellow sand. In order to protect the integrity of the corpse, of course, it could not be washed with water. Someone wet his fingers and flicked the sand out one grain at a time. Warrior Carvella. Ardarian immediately crumpled onto the ground and cried. After holding a simple funeral for Carvella, Ardarian returned to his room, dipped a quill and moistened his tongue. Then he began to write a letter. Honorable King. Agatha invaded and caused a lot of damage to Longsong Alley. Among our losses include 1,200 warhorses and 621 soldiers. Oh, of course. I don't mean to complain to you, but I'm merely reporting our situation here. I apologize for not protecting Longsong Alley well. Although we've suffered a great loss, we did not gain nothing from this ordeal. Through Agatha's words, I've learned that someone else has killed the three heroes. As for who the murderer is, that remains to be seen. But I suspect that it might be another red dragon, or perhaps a blue dragon. Today, my subordinates located the corpse of the hero, Carvella, in the desert. If you were at the scene, I believe that you will share my sorrow. As for the process of the autopsy, let's just say that it was gruesome. In short, Carvella died from the high temperature. She was probably killed by thunder or fire magic. The only one capable of defeating the three heroes in the northern region should be a dragon. Therefore, I speculate that there might be another dangerous dragon living in the northern territory who is not Agatha. Its threat is no less than that of Agatha's. I hope that the kingdom will provide us support to eliminate the threat as soon as possible. P.S. Carvella has been buried under the ridge to the south of Longsong Alley. Stand at the northern gate of the kingdom's capital, and look towards the direction of Mount Komilung. That is the direction of Carvella's final resting place. If I am lucky enough to find the remains of the other two heroes, I will bury them together. I hope that your highness can pass on this news so that the future generations can remember them. Yours truly, the loyal but incompetent Ardarian. By the time he finished writing the letter, it was already late at night. Ardarian ordered his men to bring 3 horses and deliver the letter to the capital overnight. As a lord, he was well versed in writing. However, the scenes from earlier that day was still vivid in his mind. His hand, which was holding the pen, was constantly trembling as he wrote the letter. He looked out of the window at the night sky that was as dark as the abyss. Ardarian dared not even imagine what that unknown dragon looked like. Logically speaking, his Longsong Alley was not a wealthy city. It could at most satisfy the appetite of a single dragon when it came to treasures. If there were 2 of them, Longsong Alley would not be able to afford such a huge expenditure. There was also another problem. Dragons were not a united race. As a result of the other dragon's existence, both dragons would most likely extort him for treasures at an even greater pace. The 2 dragons would not coexist in peace. Unfortunately, to Ardarian's knowledge, all signs indicated that there was another dangerous dragon living in the desert. Perhaps it was even stronger than Agatha. If such a dangerous dragon was not eradicated as soon as possible, it would pose a huge danger for the Pandey kingdom in the future. Back when the humans were still divided and the continent was split into 5 countries, each nation had suffered great losses to the dragons. However, now that they had united under a single flag, they could gather the strength of the entire country and sweep the north together. It was also a great opportunity to get rid of the mystery dragon and Agatha. Moreover, the matter was also getting more and more urgent. All three heroes had already perished, and it was enough to show the urgency of the situation. Ardarian clenched his fists. If it was just Agatha alone, Longsong Alley would have been able to hold on for a while, but now there were two dragons, and one of them had killed all three heroes that the kingdom was proud of. They needed to get rid of the mystery dragon as soon as possible. Daddy, Daddy. Ha ha ha. Daddy, you're running too slow. You won't be able to catch me like this. The little princess, Tess, was not even 10 years old. Her body was very thin, but she ran like a deer. Slow down. Slow down. The old king had already retired from the battlefield for many years, and he was no longer as brave as he was in the past. Moreover, some of the internal injuries he had suffered on the battlefield had all come knocking at his door at his old age. Once he started running, he felt as if his knees and lumbar joints were on fire. He could not catch little Tess at all, and thus, he needed to think of a way to end the game of cat and mouse as soon as possible. Hey! The old king squatted on the ground and panted. Little Tess, let's play another game. However, little Tess pouted and replied with a grimace, no. You always brag to me that you can carry a lance to and fro on the battlefield, but now you can't even catch up to a little girl. That was when I was still young. While the old king was defending himself, he saw a guard rushing over. Little Tess did not know what had happened, but usually, a scene such as this had signified the end of her playtime. Thus, little Tess rushed up and pushed the guard away. This B***** is always disturbing my playtime with Daddy. However, while she was trying to push him away, little Tess caught some of the guard's words. Words like letter and northern dragon. Then, she noticed her father's gloomy expression. Little Tess, go and practice your lute. We can play another day. Following this, her father got up and left. Although little Tess was angry, based on her experience, it was useless to act cute at this time. Therefore, she could only vent her anger on the guard. She threw a fist at the guard. The guard was already prepared. He saw little Tess's fist coming at him. He skillfully opened the chain mail on his upper body. This was so that little Tess's fist would not land on the hard steel. The situation is very serious. After reading the letter, the old king let out a long sigh. The letter was sent by the northern lord, Ardarian. The contents of the letter mainly said that there were two dragons of at least ancient level in the north. One ancient dragon was already a difficult enough threat, but now there were two of them. If they were to ignore them, Longsong Alley would undoubtedly become a lost cause. Longsong Alley was one of the most important copper mining cities in the kingdom. If it was destroyed, it would have a huge impact on the kingdom's finances. The production of weapons would decrease, and the distribution of copper coins would also be restricted. Moreover, it would have a great impact on the morale of the army. After all, the continent had just been unified not long ago. What he needed to do now was to stabilize the situation. The old king put down the letter and said slowly, with my authority as king, I hereby order all the lords of my kingdom. Gather your troops. We are going to war.